For the longest time, I thought she loved me, not just liked me, not just enjoyed being around me. I thought she actually loved me because she talked to me every day. She wanted to know what I was doing. She asked about my life like it mattered to her. And when someone shows you that kind of attention, it's easy to believe the feelings behind it are real. So I believed it. I believed the late night conversations meant something deeper. I believed the way she smiled when we talked meant she cared. I believed all the time we spent together was building something real. But looking back now, I think she didn't love me. I think she loved the attention. There's a difference. When someone loves you, they care about who you are, your thoughts, your struggles, your future. They care about the person standing in front of them. But when someone loves the attention, the focus isn't really on you, it's on how you make them feel. The compliments, the validation, the feeling of being wanted. And for a while I was giving her all of that. I was the person who always answered, the person who always listened, the person who always showed up when she needed someone to talk to. And I thought that meant I mattered to her, but eventually I started noticing something strange. Whenever I pulled back, she suddenly came closer. Whenever I stopped giving her attention, she started reaching out again. Not because she missed me, but because she missed the way I made her feel. And that's when something started becoming clear. Maybe she didn't love me the way I thought she did. Maybe she just loved having someone who cared about her that much. Once that thought entered my head, that maybe she didn't love me, maybe she just loved the attention, I started seeing things differently. Moments that once felt meaningful started feeling different. I remembered how often she reached out when she was bored, when she had nothing going on, when she needed someone to talk to. And every time I was there, answering her messages, listening to her problems, giving her reassurance whenever she doubted herself. At the time, I thought that's what love looked like. Two people being there for each other. But when I really looked at it honestly, something felt uneven. Because when she needed attention, I was always available. But when I needed support, it didn't always feel the same. Sometimes she would disappear. Sometimes the conversation would suddenly end. Sometimes it felt like the connection only existed when she was the one who needed it. And that's when a difficult question started forming in my mind. Was she actually interested in me? Or was she interested in the way I made her feel about herself? Because attention can be addictive. When someone constantly reminds you that you're special, that you're wanted, that someone cares deeply about you, it feels good, really good. And some people don't fall in love with the person giving them that feeling. They fall in love with the feeling itself, the validation, the reassurance, the comfort of knowing someone is always there. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with, but someone who gave her a constant source of emotional attention. And the moment I started seeing that pattern, everything began to make more sense. The more I thought about it, the more patterns started standing out. Because when someone actually loves you, their presence in your life is consistent. They don't only show up when they need something. They don't only reach out when they're bored. They don't only care when the attention is focused on them. But with her, the connection always seemed to revolve around how she felt. If she had a bad day, I was the first person she called. If she felt insecure, I was the one reminding her how amazing she was. If she needed someone to listen, I was always there. And at the time, I thought that meant I was important to her. But eventually, I noticed something uncomfortable. When I had a bad day, she wasn't always there the same way. When I needed reassurance, the conversation would shift quickly. When I tried to open up about my own struggles, it didn't always hold her attention for long. And that's when it started feeling like the relationship wasn't built around us. It was built around her receiving and me giving. And the scary part about that kind of dynamic is you don't notice it right away. Because when you care about someone, giving feels natural. You don't keep score. You don't measure every moment of effort. You you just show up because you believe the connection matters, but slowly you start realizing something. You're the one holding most of the emotional weight. You're the one keeping the conversations alive. You're the one making sure the connection doesn't fade. And when you stop doing that, everything changes. That's when the real truth shows itself. Because the moment I stopped giving her constant attention, something strange happened. She didn't start fighting harder for the connection. She didn't try to understand what changed. Instead, the distance grew. And that's when I realized something that hurt more than the breakup itself. She didn't miss me. She missed the attention I gave her. Realizing that she didn't miss me, she missed the attention, was one of the hardest truths to accept. Because when you care about someone deeply, you don't want to believe that your place in their life was built around something that shallow. You want to believe the connection meant something real, that the conversations mattered, that the time you spent talking late at night actually meant you were building something. But once I started paying attention to the pattern, it became impossible to ignore. Whenever I gave her attention, everything felt great. She was warm, engaged, interested. She would laugh more, reply faster, make it seem like we had this deep connection. But the moment that attention slowed down, everything changed. Suddenly the conversations felt shorter, the interest faded, the energy shifted, and that's when it finally clicked. Her feelings weren't connected to me. They were connected to the attention I was giving her. Because when someone loves you, their connection doesn't disappear just because the attention changes. But when someone loves the attention, the moment that validation slows down, so does their interest. And looking back now, that explains everything. Why she would suddenly become distant, why she would come back the moment I stopped reaching out, why the connection always felt strongest when I was the one giving the most. It wasn't love, it was validation, and I was the person supplying it. Once I finally understood that she loved the attention more than she loved me, a lot of things started making sense. For the longest time, I kept wondering why the connection always felt unstable, why some days she seemed completely invested, and other days she felt distant, why the energy between us depended so heavily on how much I was giving. At the time, I thought that was normal. I thought relationships just had ups and downs. But there's a difference between normal ups and downs and a connection that only exists when one person is constantly feeding it. And that's what this was. Whenever I was fully present, texting first, asking about her day, complimenting her, showing that I cared, everything felt good between us. But when I pulled back even slightly, the dynamic changed immediately. The warmth disappeared, the conversation slowed down, and the connection that once felt so strong suddenly felt fragile. That's when it became impossible to ignore what was really happening. Because love doesn't disappear just because attention shifts for a moment, but validation does. Validation needs constant reinforcement. It needs someone to keep providing that feeling of being admired and wanted. And once that source slows down, the person who depended on it starts looking for it somewhere else. That's when I realized something that hurt more than I expected. I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person who made her feel important. And once you realize that difference, you start understanding the relationship in a completely different way. Once that realization settled in, that she loved the attention more than she loved me, something inside me started shifting. At first it hurt more, because it meant all the things I thought were meaningful might not have meant the same thing to her. All those long conversations, all the moments where she told me things she said she didn't tell anyone else, all the time she said she appreciated having me in her life. I thought those things meant we were building something real, but now I started seeing them through a different lens. Maybe she didn't say those things because she loved me. Maybe she said them because she loved the feeling of having someone who cared about her that much. And that's a dangerous dynamic, because when someone becomes your main source of validation, it feels powerful. You feel admired, you feel important, you feel like someone is always there to remind you that you matter. But that feeling isn't the same as love. Love cares about the person giving the attention. Validation only cares about the feeling it creates. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Whenever I tried to shift the focus of the relationship, whenever I wanted something deeper, the energy changed. If I asked serious questions about where things were going, if I talked about building something more stable, if I needed emotional support myself, that's when the connection suddenly felt weaker. Almost like the relationship only worked when I was the one giving, not when I needed something back. And that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The relationship wasn't built on mutual connection. It was built on attention, and I was the one providing it. After I understood that the relationship was built more on attention than love, another uncomfortable truth started showing itself. I wasn't just giving attention, I was maintaining the entire connection. I was the one making sure the conversation didn't die. I was the one checking in first. I was the one asking how she was doing, making sure she felt heard, making sure she felt valued. And at the time, I didn't see that as a problem. When you care about someone, putting in effort feels natural. You don't think about it like a transaction. You think about it like loyalty. But over time, I started noticing something. The relationship only felt alive when I was feeding it. Whenever I stepped back, even a little, everything started fading. The messages slowed down, the energy dropped. The connection that once felt strong suddenly felt fragile, and that's when it hit me. Love doesn't disappear the moment someone stops giving constant attention, but validation does. Validation needs fuel. It needs someone constantly reminding you that you're wanted, that you're interesting, that someone is thinking about you. And the moment that fuel slows down, the person who depended on it starts feeling empty. That's when they either come back asking for more, or they go find someone else who will give it to them. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with. I was a source of attention, a source of validation, a source of emotional reassurance. And once you realize you were someone's source, not their choice, the whole relationship starts looking different. Once I accepted that I was just a source of attention for her, something else started becoming clear. The connection only existed when it benefited her emotionally. Whenever she needed reassurance, I was important. Whenever she felt lonely, I mattered. Whenever she needed someone to remind her that she was attractive, interesting, or worth talking to, suddenly I was the person she wanted to talk to again. But the moment she felt good again, the moment that emotional gap inside her was filled, something would change. The urgency would disappear. The replies would slow down, the energy would fade, and I would sit there wondering what I did wrong. For a long time, I blamed myself for those shifts. I thought maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I didn't keep the excitement alive. But once you understand the difference between love and attention, everything makes more sense. Love stays even when the excitement fades. Love stays even when you're not constantly entertaining someone. Love stays even when the validation slows down for a moment. But attention doesn't work like that. Attention is temporary. It's something people chase when they need to feel good about themselves. And once they get that feeling again, they don't always need the person who gave it to them anymore. Looking back, that explains why the connection always felt inconsistent. It explains why some days she felt deeply invested in us all, and other days it felt like she barely noticed I existed, because I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person she turned to whenever she needed to feel important. And once I saw that clearly, the whole relationship started making sense in a way it never had before. For a while, realizing that hurt more than anything else, because nobody wants to believe they were just someone's source of attention. You want to believe the connection meant something deeper. You want to believe the time you invested mattered in the same way for both of you. But eventually something changed in the way I saw it. I stopped feeling embarrassed about how much I cared, because caring deeply isn't the problem. The problem is giving that level of attention to someone who only values the feeling it gives them. And that's a big difference. There's nothing wrong with being loyal. There's nothing wrong with showing up for someone you care about. The mistake is believing that everyone who accepts your attention values it the same way you do. Some people appreciate attention, other people depend on it. And the people who depend on it will keep you close as long as you keep feeding that feeling inside them. But the moment the attention stops, the connection disappears, not because they suddenly stop liking you, but because the feeling they were chasing isn't coming from you anymore. And once you understand that, something inside you changes. You stop chasing people who only show up when they need something. You stop investing in connections that only exist when you're the one giving, because you realize something important. You deserve someone who values you, not just the attention you give them. Looking back now, I don't think she loved me, but I also don't think she was pretending the whole time. I think she genuinely liked how I made her feel. She liked the attention. She liked the reassurance. She liked having someone who consistently reminded her that she mattered. And for a while, that was enough to keep the connection alive. But attention alone can't build something real. Because the moment that attention stops, there's nothing holding the relationship together. And that's exactly what happened. Once I stopped constantly feeding the connection, it disappeared. At first, that felt like rejection, but now I see it differently. It wasn't rejection, it was clarity, because it showed me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who only loves the feeling you give them. And once you see that difference clearly, you stop blaming yourself for the way things ended. You realize you weren't losing someone who truly valued you. You were losing someone who valued what you provided. And that's not the kind of connection worth holding on to. One day I'll meet someone who doesn't just enjoy the attention I give them. Someone who actually cares about the person giving it. Someone who chooses me even when the excitement fades. Someone who values the connection, not just the validation. And when that happens, I won't feel like I'm constantly proving my worth, because the right person doesn't stay for the attention, they stay for you. I think the hardest thing to admit now is that I waited too long for her. Not a few days, not a few weeks. I'm talking about months of believing that eventually she would see me the way I saw her. Because when you really care about someone, patience feels like loyalty. You tell yourself that love isn't supposed to be rushed, that real connections take time, that sometimes people just need space to figure things out. So I gave her that space. I stayed patient when things felt uncertain. I stayed loyal even when the energy between us started shifting. And every time something felt off, I told myself the same thing. Just give it time. Time would make her realize how much I cared. Time would make the connection stronger. Time would make everything finally fall into place. But looking back now, I realize something painful. Sometimes time doesn't fix things. Sometimes time just shows you what someone was never going to choose. And while I was waiting, she was slowly moving in a different direction. Well, when you wait for someone you care about, it doesn't feel like you're wasting time. It feels like you're being loyal. You tell yourself that patience is proof that your feelings are real. That if you just stay consistent long enough, eventually they'll see what's right in front of them. So that's what I did. I stayed. Even when the signs started becoming confusing, there were moments where she would pull closer again. Moments where the conversations felt like they used to. Moments where she would say things that made it seem like maybe, just maybe, we were finally getting somewhere. And every time that happened, it reset my hope. It made me believe the waiting was worth it. Because hope is powerful. Hope convinces you that the future will eventually match the way you feel. But the problem with hope is that it can keep you standing in the same place while the other person is slowly walking somewhere else. And I didn't see that at the time, Because while I was waiting for things to become clearer, she was slowly becoming less certain about us. And the scariest part is how quietly that shift happens. It doesn't start with a big moment. It starts with small changes, replies that come slower, conversations that feel shorter, energy that feels just a little different than before. At first you ignore it because you tell yourself the same thing you've been telling yourself the whole time. Just give it time. But sometimes time doesn't move people closer. Sometimes it slowly moves them away. And by the time you realize that, you've already waited longer than you should have. The strange thing about waiting for someone is that you don't realize how much time you're giving away until you look back at it. While I was waiting for her to figure out her feelings, my whole mindset was built around patience. I told myself that real connections take time, that people sometimes need space before they realize what's right in front of them. So whenever things felt uncertain, I convinced myself that uncertainty was just part of the process. I thought eventually she would see me the way I saw her, but the longer I waited, the more the relationship started feeling one-sided. Not in obvious ways. She still talked to me. She still checked in sometimes. She still kept the connection alive just enough that it never felt completely over. And that's the part that kept me there, because every small moment of closeness made it seem like progress. Like maybe we were finally moving towards something real. But looking back now, those moments didn't mean we were getting closer. They just meant she wasn't ready to fully let me go yet. And there's a big difference between someone building something with you and someone keeping you close while they're still figuring out what they want. At the time, I couldn't see that difference clearly. All I knew was that I cared about her, and I believed that eventually she would care about me the same way. So I stayed patient, even when the signs started becoming harder to ignore, even when the connection started feeling less stable than it used to. Because once you invest that much time waiting for someone, it becomes harder to walk away. You start telling yourself that leaving now would mean all that waiting was for nothing. So you stay longer, you give it more time, you hope just a little more, and that's how you end up realizing something painful later on. You didn't just wait for her. You waited too long. The hardest part about waiting too long for someone is realizing that the time you gave them was real, even if the outcome wasn't. Because every day I stayed patient, I believed it meant something. Every message I sent, every conversation where I tried to understand her better, every moment where I chose to stay instead of walking away when things felt uncertain, to me those moments were proof that I cared, proof that the connection mattered enough to fight for. But there's something difficult about waiting that you don't notice until it's already happened. Waiting slowly turns into hoping, and hoping slowly turns into ignoring reality. There were signs that things weren't moving the way I thought they were. Moments where her effort didn't match mine. Moments where the connection felt like it was staying in the same place instead of growing. Moments where it felt like I was investing more emotionally than she was. But every time I noticed those signs, I told myself the same thing. Just give it more time. Because when you care about someone, you don't want to believe the connection might not lead anywhere. You want to believe the patience will eventually pay off. But the truth is, patience only works when both people are moving toward the same thing. If one person is waiting while the other person is slowly drifting away, time doesn't bring you closer. It just stretches the distance. And by the time I started realizing that, I had already waited longer than I should have. Another thing about waiting too long for someone is how quietly it changes your life. Because when you're emotionally invested in someone, your decisions start revolving around them. You hold space for them in your future. You imagine what things could become. You avoid moving on because a part of you still believes they might eventually choose you. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't explore other connections. I didn't let myself get too close to anyone else because, in my mind, I was already committed to her. Even if the relationship wasn't fully defined, And that's the trap of waiting. You stay emotionally loyal to someone who hasn't fully chosen you yet, not because you're naive, but because you believe loyalty will eventually be recognized. You believe that if someone sees how patient you are, how consistent you are, how much you care, they'll eventually realize you're the right person. But life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes people appreciate your patience, sometimes they even care about you, but that doesn't always mean they'll choose you. And that's a painful thing to understand, because it means the time you gave them didn't guarantee the future you imagined. And when that realization finally hits, you start asking yourself a difficult question. Was I waiting for the right person? Or was I waiting for someone who was never going to choose me in the first place? Once I started asking myself that question, honestly, everything began to look different. Because when you stop looking at the situation through hope, you start seeing it through clarity, and clarity shows you things you didn't want to notice before. Like how often I was the one reaching out first, how often I was the one trying to keep the connection alive, how often I was the one convincing myself that things would eventually work out. At the time, I thought that was just what patience looked like, but now I understand something important. Patience in a relationship only makes sense when both people are building something together. If only one person is investing time, effort, and emotional energy, that's not patience. That's imbalance. And I was standing in that imbalance longer than I should have, because I kept believing that eventually the effort would be returned, eventually the connection would stabilize, eventually she would see me the same way I saw her, but eventually never came. And the hardest part about realizing that isn't just the heartbreak, it's realizing how much time you spent waiting for something that was never truly moving toward you. For a while, that realization made me feel foolish, because it made me feel like I should have known sooner, like I should have seen the signs earlier, like I should have walked away the moment things started feeling uncertain. But the truth is, caring about someone doesn't make you foolish, it makes you human. When you believe in someone, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. You want to believe their uncertainty is temporary. You want to believe the connection you feel will eventually become mutual, so you stay longer, you give more time, you hope a little harder, and sometimes that hope leads to something real. But sometimes it just leads to a lesson. And the lesson I learned is something I'll never forget. You shouldn't have to wait indefinitely for someone to recognize your value. If someone truly sees you as part of their future, they don't leave you standing in uncertainty for months. They choose you, and they show that choice through their actions. Once I understood that, the pain started changing into something else. Perspective. Because waiting too long for someone doesn't mean you were weak. It means you believed in the possibility of something meaningful. And there's nothing wrong with believing in people, but there's a difference between believing in someone and ignoring the reality of their actions, because actions always tell the truth eventually. Someone who truly wants you doesn't keep you waiting forever. They don't keep you guessing about where you stand. They don't keep you in a place where you feel like you're hoping more than you're building. They make their intentions clear, and if someone doesn't do that, the waiting only leads to one outcome. Eventually you realize you were holding space for someone who wasn't holding space for you. When I finally stopped waiting for her, something surprising happened. I started getting my clarity back. Because when you're waiting for someone emotionally, a part of your life feels paused. Your focus stays tied to the possibility of what could happen. Your decisions revolve around the connection. Your energy stays invested in someone who might not even be moving in the same direction. But the moment you stop waiting, everything shifts. You start seeing things more objectively. You start realizing how much emotional energy you were giving to someone who wasn't fully present, and you start understanding something important. The time you spent waiting wasn't wasted. It taught you exactly what you should never accept again. Looking back now, I can honestly say I waited too long for her. but I don't regret caring. I don't regret being patient, because those things say something about who I am. What I do regret is staying in uncertainty longer than I should have, because the right person doesn't make you wait forever to feel chosen. They don't keep you in a constant state of hoping. They don't make you question whether the connection is real. They make their intentions clear. They meet your effort with their own, and they move forward with you, not away from you. So yeah, I waited too long for her, but that experience taught me something I'll carry with me forever. Next time I won't stay in a place where I feel like I'm waiting to be chosen, because the right connection doesn't feel like waiting. It feels like moving forward together. I know hopeless romantic sounds naive to some people, like it means you don't understand how the world works, but that's not true. A hopeless romantic isn't someone who ignores reality. It's someone who sees it clearly and still chooses love anyway. It's knowing how badly love can hurt and still believing it's worth it. I don't believe in love because I think it's easy. I believe in it because I know how rare it is when it's real. Being a hopeless romantic means you don't just want someone, you want connection. You want the kind of love where attention doesn't wander, where effort isn't forced, where choosing each other feels natural, not strategic. You want late night talks that don't feel rushed, silence that feels comfortable, inside jokes no one else understands. You want to build a world with one person and let the rest fade into the background. And yeah, you know the risk. You know love can leave scars. You know it can change you. You know it can take pieces of you that don't come back the same. But being a hopeless romantic means you'd rather feel deeply than live safely. You don't want love that's casual. You don't want to act detached. You don't want to pretend you wouldn't be devastated to lose someone you care about. You want to care. You want to choose someone fully and mean it. No exits, no backups, no pretending you're less invested than you are. And that's what makes it hard sometimes, because the world rewards indifference. It praises being unbothered. It treats emotional distance like maturity. So when you show up soft, present, intentional, people call you too much, but you're not too much. You're just not built for shallow love. A hopeless romantic doesn't love this way because they're weak. They love this way because they're brave enough to risk being hurt for something that actually matters. You're not chasing a fantasy. You're chasing alignment, the kind of love that feels steady, not chaotic, intense but safe, deep but mutual. And even if it takes longer, even if you have to wait, even if you get hurt along the way, you don't regret loving like this, because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. So no, you won't grow out of it. You won't harden. You won't stop wanting something real. You're a hopeless romantic because you refuse to let the world convince you that love should be shallow, casual, or disposable. And one day, someone will meet you in that same place. They won't laugh at your softness. They won't flinch at your depth. They won't ask you to tone it down. They'll recognize it, and that's when you'll realize you were never hopeless. You were just holding out for something worth believing in. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you believe love will save you. It means you believe it's worth showing up for. It means you don't enter connections casually. You don't date out of boredom. You don't give your heart halfway just to say you tried. When you love, you mean it. You pay attention. You remember small things. You imagine futures without realizing you're doing it. Not because you're delusional, but because that's how your mind works. You see potential where others see risk, and you know that scares people. Some people love with limits, with conditions, with an exit already planned. You don't. You love with the intention to stay if it's right. That's why breakups hit you harder. That's why disappointment lingers longer. That's why you take time to heal. Because when you commit emotionally, you don't do it lightly. People tell you to protect your heart, to be less invested, to stop giving so much. But they don't understand. Loving deeply isn't something you can switch off. It's how you experience the world. You feel things fully. Music hits harder, memories stick longer, connection means more. And yes, that makes life heavier sometimes, but it also makes it meaningful. You don't want love that feels replaceable. You don't want someone who treats you like an option among many. You want to be chosen the same way you choose, intentionally, fully, without hesitation. And until that exists, you'd rather be alone than half present in something shallow. That's the part people miss. A hopeless romantic isn't desperate for love, they're selective. They'd rather wait than cheapen the way they love just to fit in. So when you say you're a hopeless romantic, what you really mean is you still believe connection matters, you still believe loyalty is rare, you still believe love should feel like home, not like a negotiation. And even after heartbreak, after disappointment, after learning how badly love can hurt, you don't shut down, you slow down, you heal, you keep your heart intact, because the world already has enough people who don't care. What it doesn't have enough of are people willing to love honestly without pretending it's easy. And that's not weakness, that's conviction. Being a hopeless romantic isn't about expecting perfection. It's about refusing to treat love like something disposable. It's knowing that connection is rare and not watering it down just to seem unaffected. You don't fall for people easily, but when you do, it's intentional. You don't love out of loneliness, you love out of recognition. There's a moment where you see someone, not just who they are, but who they could be with you, and something in you locks in, not obsession, not fantasy, commitment, and that's where people misunderstand you. They think you're idealizing, they think you're rushing, they think you're setting yourself up to get hurt, but what they don't see is how much restraint it takes to love like this in a world that treats feelings like liabilities. You know how badly it can go. You've felt the disappointment, the silence, the slow realization that someone didn't choose you the way you chose them, and still, you don't turn cold, you don't reduce love to strategy, you don't keep score, you don't enter connections with a backup plan. Because loving halfway feels worse to you than losing someone you loved fully. You want the kind of love that's unmistakable, where effort doesn't fluctuate, where intentions don't need decoding, where loyalty isn't treated like something rare or surprising. You want love that's steady, not loud, not chaotic, not anxiety disguised as excitement, just real. And yes, that means you get hurt deeper, because when you love, you're all the way in. You don't protect yourself by caring less. You protect yourself by choosing carefully. That's the difference. A hopeless romantic isn't reckless. They're discerning. They'd rather be alone than share space with someone who makes them feel like they're asking for too much just by wanting honesty, effort, and presence. And if that means waiting longer, so be it. Because you're not waiting for attention. You're waiting for alignment. For someone who doesn't flinch at your depth, who doesn't joke about your softness, who doesn't need you to tone it down to make things easier. Someone who sees the way you love and says, good, I do too. So no, you won't stop being a hopeless romantic, not because you haven't learned, but because you've learned exactly what it costs and you've decided it's still worth it. Being a hopeless romantic means you don't know how to love a little. You either feel it or you don't. And when you feel it, it changes the way you move. You start noticing the small things, the way someone texts you when they're busy, the way they remember what you said weeks ago, the way they look at you when you're not trying, and you don't call that doing too much, you call that real. But the world tries to train that out of you. It tells you to be chill, to act like you don't care, to keep your feelings locked up until someone earns them. So you try to play that role, you try to be distant, try to be casual, try to treat love like it's just another thing, and it never works, because that's not who you are. You don't want a connection where you're constantly guessing. You don't want to be with someone who makes loyalty feel rare. You don't want a love that only shows up when it's convenient. You want the kind of love that feels chosen, not maybe, not we'll see, not I'm not sure, chosen. And sometimes that's what makes it lonely, because you keep meeting people who like the attention, but don't respect the intention. People who love the way you make them feel but don't want to carry the responsibility of caring back, so you end up doing the hardest thing for someone like you. You walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally realized love shouldn't require you to beg for consistency. A hopeless romantic doesn't stay where they're confused. They don't keep giving their heart to someone who treats it like something optional. They'd rather be alone than feel lonely next to someone, and that's not weakness, that's standards. Because if you love deeply, you have to protect that depth, not by becoming cold, but by becoming honest about what you need, and what you need is simple: presence, effort, loyalty, clarity. The kind of love that doesn't make you question yourself for wanting something real. What hurts the most as a hopeless romantic isn't rejection. It's realizing someone enjoyed being loved by you, but never intended to love you the same way. They liked the attention, the consistency, the way you showed up without hesitation, but when it came time to match that energy, to choose you with the same certainty, they hesitated, and that hesitation sticks with you because you don't love casually, you don't give pieces of yourself without meaning to. So when someone accepts your love without offering clarity in return, it feels like betrayal, even if they never promised anything. That's the quiet pain of being a hopeless romantic. You assume people love the way you do, with intention, with follow-through, with the understanding that feelings carry weight, and when they don't, you start questioning yourself. Am I asking for too much? Am I moving too fast? Am I wrong for wanting something solid? But the truth is, you weren't wrong. You were just loving someone who didn't have the same capacity. Some people like being cared for more than they like caring back. They want the benefits of your depth without the responsibility of meeting it, and learning that forces you to grow. Not by loving less, but by loving smarter. You start paying attention to actions, to consistency, to whether someone shows up when it's easy and when it's inconvenient. You stop pouring into people who only give when it suits them, not because you've become colder, but because you've learned your heart isn't something everyone deserves access to. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you accept crumbs. It means you believe in love enough to walk away when it's not being returned honestly. And that's the part people don't see. Your softness comes with strength, your depth comes with discernment, because loving deeply also means knowing when to stop. Being a hopeless romantic means waiting doesn't scare you, settling does. You've seen what happens when people accept love that's almost right. They grow quieter, they grow distant, they start convincing themselves that good enough is enough, and you know that could never be you. You don't want a relationship that slowly drains you. You don't want love that feels like compromise from the very beginning. So you wait, not because you think you're better than anyone else, but because you know yourself. You know how deeply you attach, how fully you commit, how once your heart is in, it doesn't wander. And you also know what happens when that kind of heart ends up in the wrong hands. It gets taken for granted, it gets tested, it gets stretched until it starts hurting more than it should. So patience becomes protection. You don't rush intimacy. You don't force connection. You let people show you who they are before you give them access to who you are. That's not fear. That's wisdom earned the hard way. Some days the waiting feels heavy. You watch people pair off quickly. You hear about relationships that just happened. You wonder if maybe you're overthinking things, but deep down you know the truth. You're not waiting for attention. You're waiting for alignment, for someone who doesn't flinch when things get real, who doesn't pull back when feelings deepen, who doesn't treat commitment like a loss of freedom. You want someone who stays present, who chooses you clearly, who doesn't make you question whether you're asking for too much, because to you, love isn't supposed to feel confusing. It's supposed to feel steady, and until that exists, being alone is still better than being half-loved. That's the quiet strength of being a hopeless romantic. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't lower your standards just to say you're not alone. You wait, not because you're hopeless, but because you believe the right love won't require you to betray yourself. People like you feel things more intensely, not because you're dramatic, but because you're present. When something matters to you, it doesn't sit quietly in the background, it moves through you, it stays with you. Love doesn't just pass through your life, it marks it. That's why moments linger longer, why memories feel heavier, why connections don't fade easily once they've mattered. And people tell you that's a problem. They say you should care less, detach quicker, move on faster. But they don't understand what intensity really is. Intensity isn't chaos, it isn't instability, it isn't losing control. It's depth. It's the ability to feel joy fully and grief honestly, to experience connection without numbing yourself just to make it easier. You don't skim life, you dive into it. And that's why love feels different to you than it does to most people. You don't forget easily, you don't replace people quickly, you don't treat connection like something interchangeable. When you love, it's intentional. That's why heartbreak hits harder. Because you didn't hold back, you didn't love with conditions, you didn't prepare an exit in advance, you showed up honestly. And while that hurts more in the moment, it also means something important. Nothing about your love was fake. You don't look back wondering if you tried hard enough, if you cared enough, if you were too guarded. You know you gave what you had, and that kind of certainty matters. Intensity becomes a problem only when it's given to the wrong people. With the right person, your depth won't feel overwhelming, it'll feel grounding. They won't ask you to tone it down. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't treat your feelings like something they need to manage. They'll meet you there, because the truth is, the world doesn't need fewer people who feel deeply. It needs more people who aren't afraid to. And being a hopeless romantic means you refuse to apologize for having a heart that actually shows up. At some point, you learn how to guard your heart without becoming guarded. That's a hard balance for someone like you, because you don't want to turn cold. You don't want to love halfway. You don't want to build walls so high that nothing real can get in. But you also know what happens when you give too much, too soon, to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. So you change, not by loving less, but by loving slower. You stop giving access before effort is proven. You stop filling in the gaps when someone shows you inconsistency. You stop romanticizing potential over behavior, and that doesn't feel natural at first, because you're used to leading with your heart, used to giving people the benefit of the doubt, used to assuming good intentions. But experience teaches you something important. Being open doesn't mean being unprotected. You can still be warm without being available to everyone. You can still be deep without drowning in the wrong places. So you watch, you listen, you notice who shows up consistently and who only appears when it's convenient. You let people reveal themselves instead of rushing to explain them. And that's when your love becomes safer, not smaller. You're still a hopeless romantic. You still believe in connection. You still want that kind of love where effort feels mutual and presence feels natural. But now, you don't mistake interest for intention. You don't confuse words with commitment. You don't chase clarity, you wait to see it. And that patience isn't fear, it's respect for yourself, because you finally understand that the right person won't need you to rush your heart to keep them close. They'll move at a pace that protects what you're building together. And when you feel that, you won't have to second guess it. You'll know. There's a phase every hopeless romantic goes through that feels especially isolating. It's the part where you've learned enough to stop choosing the wrong people, but you haven't met the right one yet. So you're not heartbroken anymore. You're not chasing. You're not settling. You're just alone. And people don't understand that version of you. They assume you've become distant, that you've lost interest, that you've changed, but really you've just stopped forcing connection where it doesn't fit. You're not closed off. You're selective. You're not cold. You're careful. You've reached a place where surface level attention doesn't move you anymore. Small talk feels hollow, inconsistent effort feels loud, mixed signals feel exhausting, so you walk away sooner, you disengage faster, you don't explain yourself as much, and that can feel lonely, because now you're surrounded by people but not met by anyone. You want depth, you want presence, you want someone who doesn't flinch when emotions enter the room, and until that shows up, nothing else feels worth your heart. This is usually the point where people tell you to lower your standards, to be more flexible, to give someone a chance, but they don't understand what it costs you to love the wrong person. They don't feel the aftermath the way you do, the way it lingers, the way it reshapes you, so you hold your ground, even when it feels quiet, even when it feels like you're the only one still believing in something deeper, because you know this loneliness is different from the loneliness you felt before. Before, you were lonely because you were giving your heart to people who couldn't hold it. Now you're lonely because you're protecting it, and that difference matters. This space isn't empty. It's the space right before alignment. The moment right before someone finally sees the way you love and doesn't ask you to soften it. And even though it's hard, even though it tests your patience, you stay here because you know the right love won't arrive while you're busy entertaining the wrong ones. Being a hopeless romantic was never about fantasy. It was about faith. Faith that connection matters, that loyalty still means something, that choosing one person fully isn't outdated, it's intentional. For a long time, you wondered if this way of loving was something you were supposed to grow out of, if heartbreak was meant to harden you, if disappointment was meant to teach you to want less, but it never did. Every time you tried to love casually, it felt wrong. Every time you tried to detach, you felt empty. Because loving deeply was never a habit you picked up, it was part of who you are. You weren't built to love halfway. You weren't meant to treat people like options. You weren't meant to keep one foot out the door just in case. And yes, that made the journey harder. You felt things more intensely. You lost futures you had already imagined. You walked away from people you still cared about because they couldn't meet you where you stood. But none of that was wasted. Every disappointment refined you. Every heartbreak taught you discernment. Every lonely stretch strengthened your standards, not so you'd love less about it, but so you'd love right. Now you understand something clearly. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you face it and still refuse to settle. You don't want perfect love, you want present love. The kind that doesn't confuse you, the kind that doesn't require self-editing, the kind that chooses you with the same certainty you offer in return. And when that finally arrives, it won't feel overwhelming. It won't feel chaotic. It won't feel like something you have to chase. It'll feel calm, mutual, safe. You won't wonder where you stand. You won't question if you're asking for too much. You won't feel like you're loving harder than you're being loved. And in that moment, everything will make sense. All the waiting, all the walking away, all the times you chose being alone over being half loved. You weren't too much. You were just ahead of your time in a world that forgot how to love with intention. So no, being a hopeless romantic isn't something you need to fix. It's something you protect, because when the right person finally meets you there, they won't try to change you. They'll recognize you, and you'll realize you were never hopeless at all. You were just holding out for a love that was worthy of you. It's Valentine's Day, and yeah, I'm alone. No dinner plans, no flowers. No good morning, beautiful text waiting on my phone. Just me. And for a second, it hits. You scroll and see everyone posted up. Roses, candles, soft captions about my forever. And you start wondering what it feels like to be chosen like that. Not privately, not secretly, but confidently. I won't lie, there's a quiet sting to it. Not because I need the holiday, but because it reminds you of what you don't have. It makes you question things. Am I behind? Am I unlovable? Did I miss my person somehow? But here's the part I'm learning. Being alone today doesn't mean I'm unwanted. It means I haven't settled. I could have been in something halfway. Could have forced a connection just to say I wasn't alone tonight, but I didn't. and that matters. So yeah, I'm alone, but I'm not desperate, not chasing, not pretending, just here. And maybe that's not sad. Maybe it's strength. Valentine's Day has a way of making you feel behind. Like everyone else got the memo and you didn't. You open your phone and it's everywhere. Couples at dinner, surprise gifts, long captions about my person. And even if you're strong, even if you've healed, even if you're okay most days, comparison still creeps in. You start measuring your life against highlight reels. You forget that people only post the soft parts. You forget the arguments, the doubts, the almost breakups. All you see is what you don't have. And for a minute, it makes being alone feel heavier. Not because you suddenly need someone, but because the world makes it look like today is proof of something. Proof that you're chosen, proof that you're loved, proof that you made it. But here's the truth nobody posts. A relationship on Valentine's Day doesn't mean it's healthy. Flowers don't mean loyalty. A dinner reservation doesn't mean forever. And being alone doesn't mean you failed. It just means your story isn't on display today. And that's okay. There's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. And today forces you to notice it. Being alone is physical. It's no dinner plans, no shared dessert, no one reaching for your hand across the table. Lonely is emotional. Lonely is feeling unseen even when someone's sitting next to you. Lonely is being in a relationship where you still question if you matter. I've been lonely with someone before, and honestly, that felt worse than tonight, because at least now I'm not pretending. I'm not settling for half attention just to say I'm not alone. I'm not forcing conversation to avoid silence. It's just me. And yeah, sometimes that's quiet, sometimes it's heavy, but it's honest. There's no confusion here, no mixed signals, no wondering where I stand. So maybe being alone today isn't the loss I thought it was. Maybe it's just space for something real instead of something convenient. Let's be real. There's always that moment where you think about texting someone, not because you miss them, not because you want them back, but because you don't want to feel alone tonight. You scroll, you hover over a name, you think, it's just a harmless message, just a hey, just what are you up to? Just something to fill the silence. And for a second, your pride and your loneliness argue, because attention is easy to get. Connection isn't. You could text the almost, the ex, the person who only shows up when it's convenient, and maybe they'd respond. Maybe they'd even make you feel wanted for a few hours. But tomorrow, you'd wake up right back in the same place, because you didn't want them, you wanted distraction. And there's a difference. So instead of reaching for temporary comfort, you sit with the quiet. You choose not to reopen doors that were closed for a reason. You choose not to trade peace for short-term validation. And that choice, that's growth. Being alone tonight doesn't mean you're desperate. It means you're disciplined. There was a time this day would have broken me. I would have taken it personally, like it was proof that I wasn't enough. I would have blamed myself, wondered what I needed to fix, compared my timeline to everyone else's like love was some kind of race. But it doesn't hit like that anymore because I understand something now. Being single on Valentine's Day isn't a reflection of my worth, it's a reflection of my standards. I could have rushed into something, ignored red flags, stayed with someone who didn't choose me fully just so I wouldn't be alone today. But I didn't, and that's growth. This day doesn't control my value. It doesn't define my desirability. It doesn't measure my future. It's just a date on a calendar. And yeah, sometimes it still stings a little, but it doesn't shake me, because I'd rather spend one day alone than spend months with someone who makes me feel unseen. And that shift, that's peace. Spending Valentine's Day alone actually teaches you something. You learn who you are without someone validating you. There's no us to hide behind, no relationship status to lean on, no public display to prove you're wanted. It's just you, and that can feel exposing. Because when the noise dies down, you're left with your own thoughts. You start asking yourself, am I really okay? Am I lonely or just uncomfortable? Do I want love, or do I just hate feeling left out? And those questions matter, because being alone forces honesty. You realize you don't just want a relationship, you want the right one. Not someone to post, not someone to text for the night, not someone to fill space. You want something steady, intentional, real. And sitting alone tonight proves something important. You're willing to wait. You're willing to protect your peace. You're willing to sit through temporary discomfort instead of choosing permanent misalignment. That's not weakness, that's maturity. Valentine's Day alone doesn't mean you're lacking. It means you're not settling. Let's talk about self-love, but not the cliche version, not the bubble baths, not the I don't need anyone speeches, not pretending you're perfectly fine 24/7. Real self-love is quieter than that. It's not about convincing yourself you don't want love. It's about refusing to accept less just because you want it. It's choosing not to text someone who only values you when they're bored. It's not lowering your standards just to avoid feeling left out tonight. It's sitting in the discomfort without betraying yourself. Self-love isn't loud confidence. Sometimes it's discipline. It's saying, I deserve something real, even when being alone feels heavy. It's acknowledging, yeah, I want to be loved without shaming yourself for it. Because wanting love doesn't make you weak, settling does. So if you're alone today, that doesn't mean you failed at self-love. It might mean you're finally practicing. There's a quiet strength in being single in a world that glorifies couples. Everything is marketed around us, dinner for two, matching gifts, shared experiences, and when you're alone, it can feel like you're standing outside of something everyone else was invited to. But here's what people don't talk about. It takes strength to not force a relationship just to fit in. It takes strength to say, I'd rather wait in a culture that says, just take what you can get. Being single isn't a flaw. It's not a delay. It's not a sign you're unwanted. Sometimes it's a sign you refuse to compromise your standards for temporary comfort. There's power in knowing you're not with someone just to avoid this day. There's power in walking into restaurants alone without feeling embarrassed, and going home to yourself without feeling incomplete, because your worth was never meant to be measured by who's sitting next to you. And the strongest thing you can do is stand alone without shrinking. Maybe the season of being alone isn't punishment, maybe it's preparation. Because when you're by yourself, you learn things you don't learn in relationships. You learn your triggers, your patterns, your standards. You learn what you actually want without someone else influencing it. Being alone gives you clarity. Clarity about what you won't tolerate. Clarity about what makes you feel safe. Clarity about the difference between attention and intention. And maybe that clarity is building something in you. Patience, discernment, emotional discipline. So when something real does show up, you won't grab it out of fear. You won't cling to it out of loneliness. You won't confuse it with the first person who makes you feel seen. You'll recognize it calmly because you'll know the difference between desperation and alignment. Maybe this Valentine's Day alone isn't a sign you're behind. Maybe it's proof you're becoming someone who won't settle. And that kind of growth doesn't always look romantic, but it lasts. At the end of the day, I'm still alone. No dramatic plot twist, no last-minute confession, no surprise flowers at my door, just me. But it doesn't feel heavy anymore, because being alone today didn't expose a flaw in me. It exposed my discipline. I didn't text someone out of boredom. I didn't settle just to post something. I didn't force a connection to avoid the silence. I chose peace, and that choice matters more than a dinner reservation ever could. Valentine's Day used to feel like proof that I was missing something. Now it feels like proof that I'm protecting something. My standards, my growth, my future. Because when love does come, I don't want it to be rushed. I don't want it to be convenient. I don't want it to be temporary. I want it to be real. So if that means spending this day alone instead of in something halfway, I'm okay with that. Being alone tonight doesn't mean I'm unloved. It means I'm waiting for something worth loving, and that's not sad. That's strength. Sometimes I don't question if I love people. I question if I'm loved the same way back. Not liked, not wanted when it's convenient. Actually loved. The kind of love that chooses you even when it's inconvenient. Because attention is easy to get. Replies are easy. Compliments are easy. Late night, I miss you texts are easy. But consistency? Consistency is rare, and sometimes I sit there wondering, do they love me? Or do they just like how I make them feel? I show up fully, I remember details, I check in, I move intentionally. So when effort feels uneven, it doesn't make me angry. It makes me question everything. Am I asking for too much, or am I just asking the wrong person? You can be surrounded by people and still feel unloved, because love isn't about volume. It's about depth. It's about feeling chosen without begging, feeling secure without overthinking, feeling valued without performing. And when you don't feel that, you start shrinking. Sometimes the scariest thought isn't, what if they leave? It's, what if they're here but they don't love me deeply? Because half love is confusing. It keeps you around, it keeps you hopeful, but it never fully reassures you. And that's exhausting. I think a lot of us don't need more love. We need clearer love. Love that says what it means. Love that acts how it speaks. Love that doesn't leave room for constant doubt, because if I have to guess, it doesn't feel safe. And maybe the real shift isn't asking, am I loved? So I do, okay. Maybe it's asking, do I feel loved? Because love can exist, but if you don't feel it consistently, it won't heal you. It'll just confuse you. I don't want intense love. I don't want dramatic love. I want steady love. The kind that doesn't disappear when things get heavy. The kind that doesn't go quiet when reassurance is needed. The kind that doesn't make me earn my place. If I'm loved, I shouldn't have to decode it. I shouldn't have to overanalyze it. I shouldn't have to convince myself of it. Love shouldn't feel like a debate. It should feel like certainty. So am I loved? Maybe the better question is, am I staying in spaces where I consistently feel valued? Because real love doesn't make you question your worth. It reinforces it, and if I ever have to constantly wonder whether I'm loved, that might be my answer. Sometimes the question isn't, will I be loved? It's quieter than that. It's, is there something about me that makes love harder? Because when people keep leaving, or hesitating, or choosing someone else, you start internalizing it. You start wondering if maybe you're too intense, too emotional, too independent, too complicated, or maybe not enough of something, and no one ever says it directly. They just drift, they just lose interest, they just aren't ready, and you're left holding the pattern. So you sit there thinking, if I was easier to love, would they have stayed? Maybe you're not hard to love. Maybe you're just hard to manipulate, hard to breadcrumb, hard to keep around without effort, hard to confuse. And to the wrong people, that feels inconvenient. You ask questions, you want clarity. You don't pretend you're okay with half effort. That doesn't make you difficult, it makes you aware. But when you keep encountering people who aren't ready for depth, your standards start to feel like flaws. You start thinking, maybe if I needed less, maybe if I expected less, maybe if I was more chill, they would have stayed. But staying isn't the goal. Staying right is. And being easy to love often just means being easy to neglect. You're not hard to love, you're just not built for temporary. When rejection repeats itself, you stop seeing it as coincidence. You start seeing it as confirmation. Confirmation that maybe you're too much, too sensitive, too deep, too intense for people to handle long term. So you adjust, you soften your reactions, you downplay your needs, you act less invested than you actually are, because maybe if you seem lighter, less emotional, less attached, they won't leave. But here's what really happens. You slowly disconnect from yourself. You become quieter in relationships, less expressive, less honest about what you want. And when someone still walks away, it hurts even more, because now it feels like even the edited version of you wasn't enough. That's when the question gets louder. If even my smaller version isn't chosen, what does that say about me? But maybe it doesn't say anything about you. Maybe it says something about who you've been choosing. There's a difference between being hard to love and being hard to access. Hard to love sounds like a flaw, like you're difficult, complicated, too much work. Hard to access is different. It means not everyone gets the deepest parts of you. It means you don't open up instantly. It means your vulnerability isn't handed out casually. And that's not a weakness, that's discernment. You don't let just anyone in anymore. You don't overshare with people who haven't earned trust. You don't attach quickly just because there's chemistry. To someone who wants easy, that feels frustrating. To someone who wants depth, that feels rare. You're not hard to love, you're just not available for surface level connection. And the wrong people will always call that too much, but the right person, they'll call it intentional. Maybe the real issue was never that you're hard to love. Maybe you've been loving people who don't know how to love deeply. There's a difference. Some people like the idea of you, your attention, your softness, the way you show up for them. But when it's time to reciprocate, they struggle, not because you're asking for too much, but because they don't have that depth to give. And instead of admitting that, it's easier for them to label you. Too intense, too emotional, too serious. But wanting clarity isn't intense, wanting effort isn't emotional, wanting something real isn't serious, it's healthy. You're not hard to love, you're hard to half love, and that's where the tension comes from. Because people who operate casually feel pressure around someone who operates intentionally, but pressure isn't the same as incompatibility, it's just misalignment. When you're repeatedly misunderstood, you start questioning your depth. You start wondering if you feel too much, if you expect too much, if you interpret things too deeply, because when people keep saying, it's not that serious, or you're overthinking, you begin to shrink your instincts, you second-guess your reactions, you silence your intuition, you tell yourself to calm down even when something feels off. But here's the truth. Depth feels dramatic to people who live on the surface. Emotional awareness feels intense to people who avoid vulnerability. Your ability to feel deeply is not a flaw, it's a capacity. And just because someone doesn't meet you there doesn't mean you're too much. It just means they don't swim that far. You're not hard to love. You're just not built for shallow connections. And that's not something you should dilute. At some point, the question changes. It stops being, am I hard to love? And starts being, are they capable of loving me properly? That shift is everything, because instead of dissecting yourself, you start observing them. Can they communicate clearly? Can they handle vulnerability? Can they stay consistent when things get real? Or do they pull away the moment depth shows up? You stop assuming you're the problem. You start noticing patterns. Some people love casually, some people love conditionally. Some people love only when it's convenient. And if you love intentionally, those dynamics will always clash. You're not hard to love. You're just not compatible with people who aren't emotionally available. And once you realize that, you stop shrinking, you stop softening your standards, you stop apologizing for wanting clarity. Because love isn't supposed to feel like convincing someone, it's supposed to feel mutual. What if being hard to love actually means you're built for something rare? Rare love isn't rushed, it isn't casual, it isn't convenient, it's intentional. And intentional love requires emotional maturity, self-awareness, consistency. Not everyone has that. So when someone meets you and realizes they can't show up fully, it's easier for them to say you're too much than admit they're not ready. Rare things aren't accessible to everyone. Depth isn't for everyone. Loyalty isn't for everyone. Emotional honesty isn't for everyone. You're not hard to love, you're selective. And selective love filters out people who only wanted access, not responsibility. You don't need someone who loves lightly. You need someone who loves intentionally. And that kind of love is never going to come from everyone anyway. At some point, you stop fearing the label. You stop trying to prove you're easy. You stop trying to shrink your depth. You stop trying to soften your standards. If loving you requires clarity, effort, and consistency, then that's the requirement, not an apology. You don't dilute your emotions anymore. You don't pretend you're fine with surface level. You don't act detached just to seem low maintenance. You embrace it. Yes, you love deeply. Yes, you need communication. Yes, you value stability. That doesn't make you difficult. It makes you intentional. And when you stop treating your depth like a flaw, you stop attracting people who are intimidated by it, because confidence changes your energy. You're not asking, is this too much? You're asking, can they meet me here? And if they can't, you don't internalize it. You understand that not everyone is equipped for the kind of love you offer, and that's okay. So, am I hard to love? No, I'm just not easy to half love. I don't do confusion. I don't thrive on inconsistency. I don't mistake potential for commitment anymore. If loving me requires effort, that's because I give effort. If loving me requires honesty, that's because I offer honesty. If loving me requires depth, that's because I refuse to stay shallow. I used to think I needed to soften, to be less emotional, less aware, less intense, but the right love won't ask me to shrink. It won't call my standards too much. It won't label my needs as dramatic. It won't feel overwhelmed by my depth. It will meet it. So no, I'm not hard to love. I'm just built for someone who loves intentionally, someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't compare, someone who doesn't need convincing. And until that shows up, I'm not a problem to fix. I'm just not available for less. And that's not being hard to love. That's knowing exactly how I deserve to be loved. Being the introvert in the relationship means loving someone who lives louder than you do. They talk easily, they fill rooms, they connect fast, and you listen, you observe, you need quiet to recharge after loving hard. Sometimes it feels like you're standing next to someone who shines effortlessly while you glow quietly. They want to go out, you want to stay in, they gain energy from people, you lose it even when you're happy. And the hardest part is not the difference. It's wondering if your quiet way of loving is enough. Because you don't always say everything, you don't always show excitement loudly, but when you choose someone, you choose them deeply. Being the introvert doesn't mean you love less. It means you love in a way that's calm, steady, and intentional, and sometimes that gets misunderstood. Being with an extrovert means watching them move through the world with ease. They make friends everywhere, they're invited everywhere, people are drawn to them naturally, and sometimes standing next to that, you wonder where you fit, not because they make you feel small, but because you don't take up space the same way. They thrive in crowds. You count the minutes until you can recharge. They talk things out loud. You process everything internally first, and there are moments where you feel guilty for needing quiet after a long day of loving them. You worry that asking for space sounds like distance, that needing alone time sounds like disinterest, but the truth is, your silence isn't absence. It's how you stay present without burning out. Loving loudly isn't the only way to love deeply, and being quieter doesn't mean you're less committed. It just means your love lives in steadiness, not spotlight. The unspoken fear is that one day you won't be enough, that they'll want more noise, more people, more energy than you can give. You worry they'll mistake your calm for boredom, your need for quiet for distance. You love them deeply but not loudly, and sometimes you wonder if that difference will matter too much. You don't compete for attention, you don't need constant stimulation, you just want connection that feels safe and real. The fear isn't that they'll leave, it's that they'll outgrow you without realizing you were loving them in the only way that feels honest to you. But loving quietly doesn't mean loving less. It means choosing them without the performance. It means staying without needing the room to notice. The right partner won't need you to be louder, they'll need you to be you. Introverts love deeply in ways that aren't always obvious. You remember details, you notice shifts in mood, you feel things before they're said. While they're talking to the room, you're paying attention to them. You're the one who listens after the party ends, the one who creates calm when everything feels loud, the one who offers presence instead of constant stimulation. Your love shows up in consistency, not volume, in choosing the same person again and again, even when it's quiet, even when no one's watching. And often your extroverted partner doesn't realize how much they need that until life gets overwhelming, until they're tired, until the noise fades, until they need someone who knows how to stay still with them. That's when your kind of love becomes the anchor. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. Introverts and extroverts can work beautifully together, but only when both ways of loving are respected. You don't need to become louder to be enough for them, and they don't need to become quieter to be right for you. What matters is understanding that your need for space isn't rejection, that their need for people isn't avoidance. You recharge differently, but you can still meet in the middle. When an extrovert learns that quiet isn't distance, and an introvert learns that excitement isn't chaos, something soft happens. You stop trying to fix each other, you start protecting each other, you give them grounding, they give you expansion, and suddenly The difference that once felt like a risk becomes the balance that makes the relationship work. Asking for space doesn't mean you love them less. It means you know yourself. Introverts don't pull away to create distance. They pull away to come back whole. But asking for that space can feel heavy. You worry it sounds like rejection. You worry they'll take it personally. You worry needing time alone makes you difficult to love. The right partner won't hear, "I need space," as "I don't want you." They'll hear it as, "I'm taking care of myself so I can show up better." You don't need to apologize for how you recharge. You don't need to explain it every time. Love doesn't require constant closeness to be real. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for a relationship is step back for a moment, not to disconnect, but to return as yourself. Introverts show love in quiet, steady ways. You remember the little things they forget they mentioned. You notice when their mood shifts before they say anything. You check in without being asked. Your love isn't loud. It's consistent. It's making space for them after a long day. It's choosing them in calm moments, not just exciting ones. It's staying present when things slow down. Sometimes you wish they could see it more clearly. Not because you need praise, but because your love doesn't always announce itself. But the right partner will feel it. They'll feel it in how safe they are with you, in how calm things get around you, in how you stay, even when nothing exciting is happening. Quiet love isn't invisible. It's just not performing. And the people who value depth will always recognize it. It's easy to compare yourself to an extroverted partner, to wonder why you don't light up rooms, why you don't want constant plans, why loving quietly feels like a disadvantage. But your quiet nature isn't something to fix. It's something that brings balance. You offer depth in a world of noise. You offer presence in a world of distraction. You offer steadiness when everything else feels fast. You don't compete for attention. You create connection. And when you stop comparing, something shifts. You stop shrinking next to their energy. You stop questioning your value. You stop feeling like you need to match them to be worthy of love. You realize your calm isn't less than their excitement. It's what gives the relationship somewhere to rest. And the right partner won't ask you to be louder. They'll thank you for being grounding. One of the quiet fears is being replaced by louder energy, by someone more outgoing, more exciting, more effortless in social spaces. You worry that your calm won't be enough forever. But the truth is, people don't stay for volume. They stay for how they feel when everything slows down. An extroverted partner may enjoy attention, but they rest in safety. They recharge in understanding. They stay where they feel accepted without having to perform, and that's where you shine. You offer a place where they don't have to impress anyone, where they can be tired, where they can be real. Loud energy is easy to find, steady presence is not, and the partner who truly values you won't look for replacement. They'll recognize that your quiet way of loving is exactly what makes the relationship feel secure. Being the introvert was never a disadvantage. It just doesn't announce itself. Your love lasts because it isn't fueled by excitement alone. It's built on presence, on listening, on staying when things are quiet and ordinary. You don't love for the room, you love for the person. And that kind of love doesn't fade when the noise does. The right partner won't ask you to be louder, faster, or different. They'll appreciate that with you. Love feels steady instead of overwhelming, safe instead of performative. So if you've ever felt like your quiet nature made you harder to love, it didn't. It made you the place someone can finally rest. And that's not less, that's rare. Loving quietly doesn't mean loving halfway. It means you choose depth over display. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most meaningful presence in someone's life. The right partner won't measure love by energy levels. They'll feel it in consistency, in safety, in how calm it feels to be with you. And one day you'll realize something simple. Your quiet wasn't something they had to tolerate. It was the reason they felt at home. We all know that one friend who's genuinely a good guy. Not the fake nice kind. Not the kind that's only good when it benefits him. I mean the real kind. The one who listens more than he talks. The one who checks in just because. The one who walks her home, texts, "Let me know when you get there," and actually waits for the reply. Not for points, not for validation. Just because that's who he is. He shows up when people call. He remembers small details. He gives effort without keeping score. And somehow, he's always the one that gets hurt. Girls say they want a good guy. They say they're tired of games, tired of being treated wrong. But when a good guy actually shows up, he gets pushed to the side, kept around just in case, treated like an option instead of a choice. He gets left on red, gets mixed signals, gets told, "You're amazing, just not right now." And then one day, he watches her choose someone who won't even do half of what he did. And the worst part? He doesn't complain about it, he jokes it off, acts like it doesn't bother him, plays it cool. But if you're paying attention, you see the change. He laughs less, questions himself more, starts wondering if being genuine is the problem, if caring too much makes him weak, if being a good guy even matters anymore. So he hardens a little, pulls back, stops giving as freely, not because he wants to be cold but because the world keeps teaching him that softness gets punished. It reminds me of Tanjiro from Demon Slayer. Gentle, compassionate, kind even to people who don't deserve it. People mistake that kindness for weakness until they realize how much strength it actually takes to stay good in a cruel world. That's the truth people forget. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't dominate. It doesn't need to prove itself. Real strength is staying kind when life gives you every reason not to be. So if you know a guy like that, be there for him. Remind him that his heart isn't a flaw, that being good isn't something he needs to outgrow, because one day someone is going to see him, really see him, and they won't make him pay for the damage done by people who couldn't handle his heart. And when that happens, being a good guy will finally feel worth it. What people don't realize is how early the good guy starts changing himself without even noticing. At first it's small, he replies a little slower, he stops double texting, he thinks twice before doing something thoughtful because he's scared it'll be taken the wrong way, not appreciated, or worse, ignored. He starts asking himself questions he never used to ask. Am I doing too much? Should I care less? Why do I always end up like this? And that's dangerous, because now he's learning to dull the very traits that made him special. The world doesn't break good guys all at once. It chips away at him slowly. Every time his effort isn't matched, every time his loyalty is taken for granted, every time he's told he's perfect but still not chosen. Eventually he starts building walls, not because he wants to play games, but because he's tired of being the only one who loses when he plays fair. He watches people who treat others poorly get rewarded with attention, love, and chances, and he wonders what he's doing wrong for choosing empathy instead of ego. But here's what nobody tells him. Being a good guy isn't about what you receive immediately, it's about who you become long-term. Patience he has, the emotional awareness, the ability to love deeply without needing control. Those qualities don't disappear just because they've been overlooked. They mature, and when the right person finally comes along, those same traits won't feel like a burden. They'll feel like safety, like home, like something rare in a world full of half-effort and emotional detachment. The good guy doesn't lose, he just waits longer for the right win. There's also something else the good guy carries that no one talks about. Guilt for feeling angry when he's treated unfairly, guilt for wanting to pull away, guilt for even questioning whether being kind is worth it anymore, because deep down he doesn't want to become someone he wouldn't recognize. So instead of expressing that frustration, he swallows it. He tells himself to be patient, to be understanding, to give people the benefit of the doubt, even when they've shown him who they are multiple times. And that self-control, that restraint, it takes more strength than most people will ever realize, but it comes at a cost. He starts to feel invisible, like his effort only matters when it's convenient for someone else, like his loyalty is expected, not appreciated. And the scariest part isn't that people take advantage of him, it's that he starts expecting it. That's when the good guy begins to question his worth, not in a dramatic way, quietly, internally. He wonders if he needs to be colder to be respected, louder to be noticed, less caring to be chosen. And even though he doesn't like those thoughts, they creep in anyway. But here's the truth he needs to hear. The world doesn't need more detached people pretending they don't care. It needs more people who choose kindness, even when it's inconvenient. More people who know how to love without manipulation. More people who stay solid when everything around them feels fake. The good guy isn't weak for feeling deeply. He's strong for not letting pain turn him into something he's not. And one day that integrity will matter more than all the times he was overlooked. At some point, the good guy has to learn a hard lesson. Being kind doesn't mean being available to everyone. Being loyal doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. And having a good heart doesn't mean you owe it to people who keep proving they don't know how to handle it. This is usually the stage where he starts choosing himself, not in a selfish way, not in a bitter way, but in a quiet, self-respecting way. He stops chasing people who only reach out when it's convenient. He stops over-explaining his intentions. He stops proving that he's different, because the truth is, the right people don't need convincing. The good guy learns that boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. They don't block love, they block misuse. And once he understands that, everything changes. He becomes more selective with his energy, more intentional with who gets access to him. He still cares deeply, but now it's earned. This is where his strength really shows. He doesn't become cruel, he doesn't become cold, he just becomes aware. He learns that love shouldn't feel like constantly waiting your turn, that effort shouldn't feel one-sided, that if someone truly values you, they won't make you question where you stand. And when he finally meets someone who matches his energy, who sees his kindness as safety instead of weakness, it clicks. All the waiting, all the hurt, all the doubt, it suddenly makes sense. Because the good guy wasn't wrong for being good, he was just giving his heart to the wrong people. There's a moment where the good guy finally realized something important. He was never meant to be understood by everyone. His way of loving was never designed for people who thrive on attention, chaos, or option. It was meant for someone who values depth, consistency, and intention. And once that clicks, he stops feeling ashamed of who he is. He understands now that not everyone deserves access to his softness, that some people only know how to take, not receive. And that doesn't make him naive, it makes him discerning. He doesn't need to change his heart, he just needs to protect it better. The good guy learns how to walk away without guilt, not because he stopped caring, but because he started caring about himself too. He learns that choosing peace over potential isn't giving up, it's growth. That silence is sometimes the loudest form of self-respect, and slowly something shifts. He speaks clearer, stops apologizing for having standards. He no longer wonders if being a good guy is worth it. He knows it is, because even if the world tried to harden him, it didn't succeed. He stayed true, and that integrity, that's something no one can take from him. One day, someone will meet him where he is. They won't question his intention, they won't test his loyalty, they won't confuse kindness for weakness. They'll recognize it immediately, and they'll protect it the same way he does. Until then, the good guy keeps moving forward, not bitter, not broken, just wiser. And when that day comes, it won't feel dramatic. It won't feel like a movie moment where everything suddenly makes sense all at once. It'll feel calm, familiar, almost quiet, because the right person won't make the good guy question himself. They won't make him wonder if he's doing too much or not enough. They won't make him feel like he has to shrink his heart to be accepted. They'll meet him where he stands. They'll appreciate the way he listens, the way he shows up, the way he loves without keeping score. And for the first time, he won't feel like his kindness is a liability. It'll feel like a gift, something mutual, something protected, something finally returned. The good guy won't have to explain himself anymore. He won't have to prove that his intentions are real. He won't have to play it cool or pretend he doesn't care. He'll be allowed to be exactly who he is, and that'll be enough. Until then, the journey matters. Every disappointment taught him boundaries. Every heartbreak taught him discernment. Every moment of doubt sharpened his sense of self. He didn't lose those years being overlooked. He was being prepared to recognize real love when it shows up, prepared to walk away from anything that feels half-hearted, prepared to protect his heart without hardening. So if you're that good guy reading this, don't change. Don't let the world convince you that you need to become colder to survive. Stay solid, stay honest, stay kind. Just be selective with who gets that version of you. Because the world doesn't need fewer good guys. It needs people brave enough to stay good even when it's easier not to. What people never see is how much discipline it takes for the good guy to stay the way he is. Every bad experience tempts him to harden up. Every time he's overlooked, replaced, or taken for granted, there's a voice in his head telling him to stop caring so much, to move differently, to love less, to become like everyone else. But he doesn't. Not because it's easy, but because he knows who he is. He understands now that changing his character to fit a broken system would only cost him himself, and losing yourself just to be chosen by the wrong people is a price that's too high. So instead of becoming colder, he becomes more intentional. Instead of closing his heart, he narrows the door. He learns that being good doesn't mean being accessible to everyone. It means being principled. It means having the strength to say no, to walk away, to choose solitude over disrespect, and that kind of self-control, that's rare. The good guy also learns to forgive, not to excuse what hurt him, but to free himself from carrying resentment. He doesn't want bitterness living rent-free in his heart. He wants peace, growth, clarity, and forgiveness is part of that process. And one day, when someone finally meets him with the same depth, the same consistency, the same effort, he'll recognize it immediately. Not because it feels intense, but because it feels familiar. Until then, he keeps building, keeps healing, keeps choosing integrity over impulse, because the good guy isn't waiting to be saved. He's becoming someone worth meeting. In the end, the good guy doesn't get a dramatic apology from everyone who hurt him. He doesn't get closure from every situation that left scars. And he doesn't get a moment where the world suddenly admits it was wrong for overlooking him. What he gets is something quiet and far more powerful. He gets peace. Peace in knowing he never had to become someone else to survive. Peace in knowing his heart stayed intact even after everything. Peace in knowing he loved honestly in a world that often rewards the opposite. He looks back and realizes that every time he was ignored, every time he was treated like an option, every time he was underestimated, it wasn't a reflection of his worth. It was a reflection of who couldn't meet him where he stood. And that understanding changes everything, because now he doesn't crave validation. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't beg to be chosen. He knows who he is, and when love finally finds him, the kind that's mutual, intentional, and steady, it won't feel like winning. It'll feel like alignment, like finally being understood without having to explain yourself, like being valued without having to prove. Until then, the good guy keeps walking forward, not bitter, not resentful, not hard, just grounded. And that's the kind of strength no one can take. The worst kind of pain is caring deeply and watching it backfire. Not because you expect anything in return, but because caring is just who you are. You show up without being asked. You check in on people who never think to check on you. You stay up late listening to problems that were never yours to carry. You give your time, your energy, your patience, not to be praised, just because you care, and somehow that becomes the thing that hurts you. Because some people don't meet kindness with care. They get comfortable with it. They start expecting it. They stop noticing it. Your effort becomes routine. Your consistency becomes invisible until one day you don't show up the same way anymore. That's when they finally notice. That's when they ask what's wrong. But by then you're already tired. Tired of explaining your intentions. Tired of proving your heart. Tired of giving pieces of yourself to people who never stay long enough to understand what it costs you. It's not that you regret caring, you just wish having a good heart didn't hurt this much. And maybe the hardest truth is realizing that loving deeply doesn't guarantee you'll be loved the same way. But that doesn't make your softness a weakness. It just means it needs protection. Don't stop caring. Just be careful who you hand that kind of love to. When you're the one who cares deeply, you usually become not the reliable one, the one people vent to, the one people lean on, the one who always answers. You're dependable in ways people don't even notice anymore. They assume you'll be there, assume you'll understand, assume you'll forgive, so they stop asking how you are, not out of cruelty, but because consistency gets mistaken for endless capacity. You start carrying emotional weight that was never meant to be yours alone. Other people's stress, other people's problems, other people's moods, and you hold it all quietly because you don't want to be a burden the way you never see them as one. But over time, something shifts. You feel tired in a deeper way, not just physically, emotionally. You notice how rarely someone shows up for you the way you show up for them, how quickly your needs get overlooked, how easily your exhaustion goes unseen. seen, and that's when it starts to hurt differently, because you didn't ask for much, you just wanted effort to meet effort, care to meet care, but instead you became the place people take from without realizing they're draining you, and slowly being the strong one starts to feel like being the forgotten one. Eventually something changes, not in a dramatic way. You don't announce it, you don't make a scene, you just stop giving the same way you used to. You reply a little later, you don't over-explain anymore. You stop stretching yourself thin just to be available, and that's when people notice. Not when you were exhausted, not when you were drained, not when you were giving everything. They notice when you pull back. Suddenly they ask what's wrong, suddenly they feel the distance, suddenly they miss the version of you that was always there, and that part hurts, because it shows you something you didn't want to see. They didn't miss you, they missed the access, they missed the comfort you provided, the effort you gave without question, the way you made things easier for them, so when you stop showing up like that, it feels personal to them, but for you, it wasn't about punishment, it was about survival. You didn't stop caring. You just stop bleeding quietly, and realizing that is both painful and freeing, because it teaches you this: anyone who only notices your absence was never really paying attention to your presence. When you finally start pulling back, the hardest part isn't the silence, it's the guilt. You feel like you're doing something wrong just by protecting yourself. You second guess every boundary. You wonder if you're being cold, if you're being selfish, if you're changing, because when you spent your life being the one who gives, rest feels like laziness, distance feels like cruelty, and saying no feels like failure. You weren't taught how to have limits. You were taught how to endure. So the moment you stop overextending, your nervous system panics. It tells you to explain yourself, to soften it, to give just a little more so no one feels uncomfortable. But here's the truth: boundaries don't feel good at first because you're used to being useful, not protected. You learned that love meant access, that care meant availability, that being needed was the same as being valued. So when you remove access, it feels like you're taking something away, but you're not. You're just finally keeping something for yourself, and that discomfort, that's not you doing something wrong. That's you breaking a pattern that was costing you more than you realized. People who care deeply often confuse love with sacrifice. They believe loving someone means giving more, trying harder, holding on longer than they should. They tell themselves, if I'm patient enough, they'll notice. If I stay kind, it'll balance out. If I keep showing up, it'll be worth it. But love was never meant to cost you your peace. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being good meant being accommodating, that being loving meant putting yourself last. So you stayed quiet about your needs. You ignored your exhaustion. You told yourself it wasn't that bad as long as everyone else was okay. But sacrifice without reciprocity doesn't make love deeper. It makes it heavier. Because when you're always the one adjusting, the relationship stops being shared. It becomes one-sided. And the scariest part is people can get used to that version of you. They don't ask if it's costing you anything. They just assume you'll keep paying the price until one day you realize love shouldn't feel like self-abandonment. Caring deeply doesn't mean giving endlessly, and loving someone should never require you to disappear in the process. There's a moment when something finally clicks. You get tired of proving that you're genuine, tired of explaining your intentions, tired of showing people your heart just so they can decide whether it deserves care. So you stop performing, you don't overextend anymore, you don't chase reassurance, you don't give more just to feel secure. And at first that feels uncomfortable because you're not used to being this guarded. You're used to leading with softness even when it costs you. But protecting your heart isn't the same as closing it. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming selective. You start noticing who respects your limits and who only liked you when you were endlessly available. You see who adjusts with you, instead of expecting you to bend every time, and that's when you realize something important. You don't need to prove your kindness. The right people will feel it without needing to take advantage of it. Protecting your heart doesn't make you less loving. It just means you're finally loving yourself too. Once you stop overgiving, You start noticing something clearly. Not everyone reacts the same way. Some people get uncomfortable, they push back, they ask why you're different now. They miss the version of you that gave without limits and never asked for anything back, but others adjust. They respect the boundary. They meet you halfway. They don't make you feel guilty for needing space or balance, and that difference matters because it shows you who valued you and who only valued what you provided. The right people don't punish you for protecting your heart. They don't withdraw when you stop overextending. They lean in. They check on you. They notice your effort because it's no longer automatic. They give without keeping score. And for the first time, caring doesn't feel draining. It feels mutual. You realize you don't have to shrink your heart to keep people around. You don't have to exhaust yourself to be worthy of love. The people meant for you won't disappear when you stop bleeding quietly. They'll stay because they never needed you to hurt in order to feel close. At the end of all this, you realize something important. Your softness was never the problem. Caring deeply wasn't a mistake. Being attentive wasn't wrong. Showing up wasn't foolish. The pain came from giving that level of care to people who didn't know how to hold it. Because the right people don't drain you. They don't get comfortable taking. They don't wait until you pull back to finally notice your value. They see it while you're still giving, and they give back. With the right people, your kindness doesn't become invisible. Your effort doesn't become expected. Your heart doesn't become something to manage. It becomes appreciated. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to overextend. You don't have to lose pieces of yourself just to stay connected. Your softness becomes strength because it's met with care, not entitlement. And that's when you understand the goal was never to stop caring. It was to stop pouring your heart into places that couldn't return it. So keep your softness. Just place it wisely, because in the right hands, your heart won't hurt this much. It'll finally feel safe. You don't chase love because you're romantic. You chase love because you don't know how to sit with yourself yet. Because silence makes your thoughts loud. Because being alone feels like proof that something about you isn't enough. So you look for love to fill the space. You attach quickly. You overextend. You give more than you should, sooner than you should. Not because you're stupid, but because being chosen feels like relief. Like if someone wants you, then maybe you can stop questioning yourself for a while. You don't just want connection. You want validation. You want someone to prove that you're worth staying for, worth prioritizing, worth choosing. So when someone shows interest, you lean in hard, you ignore red flags, you excuse inconsistency. You tell yourself, if I love them better, they'll love me back. And when they pull away, it doesn't just hurt, it confirms your worst fear, that you weren't enough. So you try harder, you become more available, more understanding, more forgiving than you should be. You abandon parts of yourself just to keep someone close, and you call it love. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not chasing them. You're chasing the feeling of being wanted. Because when someone loves you, even temporarily, it quiets the voice in your head that says you're unlovable on your own. That's why breakups destroy you. You don't just lose the person you lose the version of yourself that felt okay for a moment. You lose the distraction. You lose the proof. You lose the illusion that someone else could fix what you haven't faced yet. And that's the part no one wants to admit. Chasing love like this isn't romance. It's avoidance. It's using someone else's attention to avoid learning how to give it to yourself. Because loving yourself is harder than loving someone else. It means sitting with your flaws without asking someone to overlook them. It means choosing yourself without needing applause. It means learning how to feel whole without being held together by another person. And that terrifies you, so you chase love instead. But here's the shift, the part that hurts before it heals. The moment you stop chasing love to fill the emptiness, you start attracting it from a different place. Not desperation, not fear, not self-doubt, but choice. Because real love doesn't arrive to save you. It arrives when you're no longer asking someone else to convince you that you matter. And until you learn to sit with yourself, without distraction, without validation, without escape, Every love you chase will feel heavier than it should. You don't need someone to love you harder. You need to stop outsourcing your worth, and when you finally do, love stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like connection. You don't chase love because you're passionate. You chase it because being alone feels unbearable. Because when things get quiet, your thoughts get loud, and they don't tell you kind things. So you look for someone else to sit in that space with you, to distract you, to validate you, to make you feel wanted enough to forget how little you feel about yourself. You don't just want connection, you want relief. Relief from the constant feeling that something about you is missing, that you're behind, that if you were enough, someone would have stayed by now. So when someone shows interest, you grab onto it, you attach fast, you give more than you should, you bend your boundaries before they even ask, not because you're weak, but because being chosen feels like proof. Like if someone wants you, then maybe the voice in your head can finally shut up for a while. You start confusing attention with love, consistency with commitment, chemistry with safety, and when they pull away, it doesn't just hurt, it confirms everything you were afraid of. So you chase harder, you explain more, you forgive more, you accept less. You tell yourself that if you just love them better, they'll love you back the way you need. But what you're really doing is asking someone else to give you a sense of worth you don't know how to give yourself yet. And that's why it feels so desperate, because it's not about them. It's about the fear that without love, you have nothing to stand on. This isn't romance, it's survival. And until you learn how to sit with yourself without needing someone else to make you feel okay, every love you chase will feel heavier than it should. At some point, chasing love turns into abandoning yourself. You stop asking what you need and start asking what they want, how much space to give, how much to hold back, how to be easier to stay with. You shrink in small ways at first. You don't bring things up because you don't want to seem difficult. You accept less effort because at least they're still here. You tell yourself you're being understanding when really you're being afraid that if you ask for more, they'll leave. So you adapt, you become more available than you should, more forgiving than is healthy. You explain away behavior that already made you feel small, and every time you do, you move a little further away from yourself, but you call it love. You tell yourself this is what it means to fight for someone, to be patient, to be loyal. What you don't realize yet is that real love doesn't require you to disappear quietly. The reason chasing feels exhausting is because you're running from your own emptiness. You're hoping someone else will choose you loudly enough to silence the doubt inside you. So when they pull back, your anxiety spikes, you replay conversations, you blame yourself, you look for ways to fix it, not because you were wrong, but because you're terrified of being left alone with yourself again. And that's the cycle. The more you chase, the more you lose your footing. The more you lose yourself, the more you need them to feel okay. That's why it hurts so much. Not because they were everything, but because you made them responsible for holding you together. And no one can carry that forever. This is the part people avoid talking about. Chasing love like this doesn't mean you care deeply. It means you don't feel grounded without external validation. And until you learn how to stand on your own, how to sit with yourself without needing to be chosen, love will keep feeling like something you have to earn instead of something you share. When you chase love from a place of emptiness, you don't attract people who pour into you. You attract people who take, not always intentionally, not always maliciously, but people who sense, even subconsciously, that you're willing to overgive just to stay connected. They feel how flexible you are, how much you're willing to adjust, how far you'll bend before you break. So they let you. They accept your effort without matching it. They enjoy your presence without committing to it. They keep you close enough to benefit from your care, but far enough to avoid responsibility. And because you're chasing, you don't question it at first. You tell yourself this is just how relationships work. That love takes patience, that maybe they just need time. But deep down, something feels off. You're always the one checking in, always the one clarifying, always the one trying to fix the distance that keeps appearing out of nowhere. And instead of asking why they're inconsistent, you ask what you did wrong. That's the trap. Chasing love trains you to blame yourself for other people's lack of effort. You start believing that if someone isn't choosing you, it's because you didn't love them well enough. So you try harder, you give more reassurance, more patience, more access to parts of you that should have been protected, and the dynamic deepens. They stay comfortable, you stay anxious, they get affection without accountability, you get hope without security, and that imbalance keeps repeating until you finally see it for what it is. You're not unlucky in love, you're just chasing from a place that tells the wrong people you'll accept less than you deserve. Because people who are capable of real love don't feel comfortable being chased. They meet you halfway. The ones who stay distant, inconsistent, unclear, they stay because the chase benefits them. And until you stop chasing to feel worthy, you'll keep finding yourself in the same story with different faces. Eventually, there's a moment where chasing love stops feeling hopeful and starts feeling exhausting. You realize you're tired, not because love is hard, but because you've been doing all the emotional work alone. You're the one overthinking, the one adjusting, the one trying to hold something together that keeps slipping through your fingers. And for the first time, you ask a quiet question you've been avoiding. Why does love feel like something I have to prove myself worthy of? That question is uncomfortable because it points inward. It forces you to see that chasing love has been a distraction, a way to avoid sitting with yourself, a way to avoid asking why you don't feel enough without someone choosing you. Because as long as you're focused on them, their mixed signals, their distance, their inconsistency, you don't have to face the emptiness underneath. You don't have to ask why you're afraid of being alone, why validation feels necessary, why rejection feels like confirmation instead of redirection. So you keep chasing, but here's the truth that hurts before it heals. Chasing love delays self-healing. Every ounce of energy you spend trying to be chosen is energy you're not spending, learning how to choose yourself, and that's why nothing ever feels settled, because no matter who you're with, you're still looking to them to fix something they didn't break. They can't give you security you haven't built internally. They can't love you into self-worth. They can't silence the doubt that existed before they arrived. And once you see that, chasing loses its appeal, not because you stop wanting love, but because you realize love isn't supposed to feel like survival. It's supposed to feel like addition, not rescue. And the moment you stop running from yourself is the moment the chase starts to lose its power. Learning how to sit with yourself is the hardest part of this whole process, because when you stop chasing love, there's nothing left to distract you. No text to wait for, no signals to decode, no person to center your emotions around, just you. And that's when everything you've been avoiding comes to the surface. The insecurity you buried under effort, the loneliness you masked with attachment, the belief that without someone choosing you, you don't really matter. It feels uncomfortable at first, almost unbearable. You reach for your phone instinctively. You miss the chaos, you miss feeling needed, because chasing gave your pain direction, it gave your emptiness a target. Now there's nowhere to run. And this is where most people go back. They re-enter old dynamics, text people they shouldn't, lower their standards just enough to feel wanted again, not because they're weak, but because sitting with yourself requires honesty. It forces you to see that no one abandoned you the way you've been abandoning yourself. Every time you chased someone who was unsure, you told yourself your needs could wait. Every time you accepted inconsistency, you taught yourself to tolerate being half-chosen. So being alone feels unfamiliar, not because you can't handle it, but because you've never stayed here long enough to build something solid inside yourself. This is where self-love actually starts, not affirmations, not confidence quotes, but learning how to stay when there's no validation coming in, learning how to comfort yourself instead of outsourcing it, learning how to choose yourself without needing approval, and slowly something shifts. You stop craving attention. You stop confusing intensity with connection. You stop chasing people who feel familiar for the wrong reasons. Because now, you're no longer running from yourself. And when you stop doing that, love stops feeling like something you need to survive. When you finally start building self-love, the chase doesn't just slow down. It feels wrong. You notice it first in small ways. The anxiety doesn't hook you the same. Inconsistency doesn't feel exciting anymore. It feels draining. People who once felt magnetic now feel loud, unclear, unsafe, and that confuses you because for so long, chaos felt like chemistry. You were drawn to people who kept you guessing because guessing felt familiar, because uncertainty mirrored how unsure you felt about yourself. But now that you're learning how to stand on your own, that dynamic stops working. You don't feel the urge to prove yourself anymore. You don't feel the need to over-explain your worth. And suddenly, chasing feels humiliating, not because you're above it, but because you're finally grounded enough to feel how one-sided it always was. You start wanting different things: clarity instead of sparks, consistency instead of intensity, presence instead of pursuit. You want to be met, not chased or chasing. And here's the part people don't expect. Self-love makes some connections fall apart. People who benefited from your overgiving feel the shift immediately. They sense you're no longer bending, no longer available on demand, no longer trying to earn their attention, and some of them leave. Not because you changed for the worse, but because the version of you that chased them is gone. That can hurt, because even when you're healing, loss still feels like loss, but this time it doesn't destroy you, because you're no longer tying your value to someone else's choice. You understand something now. Love that requires chasing is love that feeds on insecurity, and love that's healthy doesn't need pursuit to survive. It shows up, it stays, it chooses you without being convinced, and the more you learn how to love yourself quietly, consistently, honestly, the less tolerance you have for anything that makes you feel like you need to beg to belong. When the chasing finally stops, a new fear shows up. Not the fear of being alone, but the fear of trusting love again without desperation. Because now you're calmer, more grounded, less reactive, and that feels unfamiliar. You're used to love coming with anxiety, with overthinking, with that constant urge to secure someone's attention before it disappears. So when things are steady, part of you doesn't know what to do. You wait for the other shoe to drop. You look for signs something is wrong. You brace yourself for distance that never comes, because chaos used to feel like proof that something mattered. Now peace feels suspicious. You're not chasing anymore, but you're still learning how to receive, how to let someone show up without questioning why, how to accept consistency without trying to earn it. And that's harder than it sounds, because chasing trained you to believe love had to be worked for, that if you weren't doing something, fixing something, proving something, it wouldn't last. So when someone meets you without needing to be convinced, your instinct is to pull back, not because you don't want it, but because you're afraid of trusting something that isn't fueled by fear. This is the quiet stage of healing, where you're not running anymore, but you're not fully relaxed either. You're learning that love doesn't have to feel urgent to be real, that being chosen calmly is still being chosen, and slowly you start letting yourself believe it. You stop checking for exits, stop rehearsing disappointment, stop preparing for abandonment that hasn't happened, because for the first time, you're not chasing to feel worthy. You're standing still and letting love come to you. And that's when you realize how much strength it actually takes to stay. When you stop needing love to save you, everything about it changes. You're not chasing anymore, but you're also not hiding. You're just stable, and that's unfamiliar. You notice how different it feels to want someone instead of needing them. There's no panic behind it, no urgency, no feeling that if this doesn't work out, you'll fall apart. And that scares you in a new way, because chasing gave you purpose. It gave your emotions somewhere to go. It made love feel intense, consuming, alive. Now, love feels quieter, not empty, just grounded. You don't lose yourself in people anymore. You don't rearrange your life to keep someone interested. You don't abandon your needs to avoid being left. And because of that, you become harder to hook, not emotionally unavailable, just unavailable to dynamics that require you to shrink. You start noticing things you used to ignore, how someone responds to boundaries, how they handle consistency, how they show up when you're not overgiving. And if they fade when you stop chasing, you don't panic, you understand. They weren't there for you. They were there for the version of you that was always reaching. That realization hurts, but it also frees you. Because now you know love that disappears when you stop chasing was never love meant to stay. This is where self-love changes the rules. You don't try to be impressive, you don't try to be indispensable, you don't try to secure someone's feelings. You let them show you who they are when you're not doing all the work, and for the first time, love feels optional. Not because it doesn't matter, but because your worth no longer depends on it. You're not chasing to fill a void anymore. You're choosing from a place that already feels whole. And that's when love stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like something you can welcome without losing yourself. Healing doesn't just bring relief, it brings grief. Because when you stop chasing love, you don't just lose old dynamics, you lose the version of yourself who survived by reaching. You look back at who you were and feel a strange mix of sadness and compassion. You remember how hard you tried, how much you gave, how badly you wanted to be chosen, and part of you wants to go back, not because it was healthy, but because it was familiar. Chasing gave you direction. It gave your pain something to focus on. It made loneliness feel purposeful. Now that version of you is gone, and that hurts. You grieve the person who believed love had to be earned, who thought being enough meant being useful, agreeable, easy to keep. You grieve the nights you waited, the messages you rewrote, the boundaries you swallowed just to stay connected, not because you were weak, but because you didn't know another way yet. And healing means accepting something painful. No one did this to you. You did it because you didn't know how to hold yourself without being held. That realization can feel brutal because it removes the villain. There's no one left to blame, just patterns you learn to survive something deeper. So you sit with it, with the sadness, with the regret, with the understanding that you were doing the best you could with what you knew at the time. And slowly, that grief turns into respect. Respect for how much you endured, for how deeply you wanted love, for how brave it was to keep believing, even in the wrong places. You don't hate the old version of you. You thank them because they carried you until you were strong enough to stop chasing and start choosing yourself. And that's what makes this stage heavy. You're not broken anymore, but you're still letting go. The chase ends the moment you stop asking love to fix you, not because you stop wanting connection, but because you stop needing it to feel whole. You finally understand something simple that took you years to learn. Love was never supposed to be proof that you matter. It was never meant to carry your worth, never meant to quiet your self-doubt, never meant to save you from yourself. That was too much to ask of anyone. So you stopped chasing, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. You stop running after people who make you feel uncertain. Stop explaining your needs to people who don't listen. Stop overgiving just to feel chosen, because now being chosen by yourself comes first. You learn how to sit with silence without panicking, how to be alone without feeling abandoned, how to exist without needing constant reassurance, and something changes. Love no longer feels urgent, it no longer feels like survival. It no longer feels like something you have to secure before it disappears. It becomes optional, not because it's unimportant, but because your life no longer collapses without it. And that's when the real shift happens. You don't attract love from desperation anymore. You don't bond through wounds. You don't mistake intensity for connection. You choose slowly. You choose clearly. You choose from a place that isn't begging to be filled. And if someone doesn't meet you there, you don't chase. You let them go, Not because you don't care, but because you care enough about yourself to stop repeating the same pain with different people. The version of you that chased love wasn't weak. They were hurting, they were lonely, they were trying to survive. But this version of you, this version doesn't run. They stand still, they breathe, they choose themselves even when no one is watching. And from here on out, love won't feel like something you have to earn. It'll feel like something you share with someone who meets you without being chased. That's where the cycle ends. Not with finding love, but with finally finding yourself. Sometimes I don't question whether I love people. I know I do. I love intentionally, I love in details, I love in the quiet ways that don't always get noticed. I remember the small things you said 3 months ago. I notice when your voice sounds slightly different. I pay attention to your moods without you having to explain them. If you're overwhelmed, I adjust. If you're distant, I check in. If you're hurting, I feel it too. So when I sit alone and that thought creeps in, am I actually loved the same way? It doesn't come from insecurity. It comes from imbalance, because loving someone isn't hard for me, but feeling consistently loved back, that's where it gets complicated. There's a difference between being wanted and being valued, between being chosen and being considered, between someone enjoying your presence and someone protecting your heart. And sometimes I can't tell which one I am. Am I loved, or am I just convenient? Am I loved, or am I just consistent? Am I loved, or am I just the safe option, the stable one, the reliable one, the one who won't leave easily? Because people say I love you all the time, but love isn't proven in the words, it's proven in patterns. Do you show up the same way on random days, not just when you're lonely? Do you care about my emotions when they're inconvenient? Do you notice when I go quiet, or do you only feel my absence when I stop giving? That's the part nobody talks about. You can be in a relationship, you can be talking every day. You can be physically close and still feel emotionally unsure, still feel like you're giving more than you're receiving, still feel like if you stop trying so hard, everything would fall apart. And if that's true, is that love? Or is that maintenance? I don't need constant reassurance. I don't need over-the-top affection. I don't need dramatic gestures. But I need to feel secure. I need to feel like I matter when I'm not performing strength. I need to feel like I'm loved even on the days I'm quiet, tired, distant, not at my best. Because real love doesn't just enjoy you when you're easy. It stays steady when you're human. And I think that's what scares me, the possibility that I'm loved for what I provide, not for who I am, loved for my stability, loved for my patience, loved for my understanding, but not deeply studied, not emotionally prioritized, not carefully handled. And if I'm being honest, I don't want half love. I don't want to be someone's comfort without being their commitment. I don't want to be someone's peace without being their priority. So yeah, sometimes I sit with that quiet question. Am I actually loved, or am I just really good at loving others? The hardest part about questioning love is that it doesn't always come from obvious neglect, doesn't always come from cheating or lying or someone clearly mistreating you. Sometimes it comes from subtle absence, from emotional gaps you can't quite explain, from feeling like you're standing next to someone but not fully with them. Because love isn't just about presence, it's about engagement. It's about whether someone studies you the way you study them. I ask myself things like, if I stopped initiating, how long would it take for them to notice? If I didn't send the good morning text, would they send one first? If I went quiet for a few days, would they check in because they care or because they're bored? And I hate that those thoughts even exist, because when love feels secure, you don't test it in your head, you don't calculate effort, you don't keep mental score, you just exist inside it peacefully. But when love feels uneven, your brain starts tracking patterns. Who apologizes first? Who makes more time? Who adjusts more? And that's when the doubt begins. Not loud doubt, quiet doubt. The kind that sits in your chest at night. The kind that makes you reread conversations. The kind that makes you wonder if you're asking for too much or just asking the wrong person. I don't want dramatic love. I don't want obsession. I don't want someone who can't function without me. I want someone who chooses me consciously, daily, not because I'm easy, not because I'm stable, not because I don't cause problems, but because they genuinely value me, because they care about my internal world, because they don't want to risk losing me through laziness or emotional distance. That's the difference. You can love someone and still be careless. You can love someone and still take them for granted. You can love someone and still assume they'll never leave. But being loved properly, that feels intentional. It feels protected. It feels like someone is actively maintaining the connection, not just enjoying it. And sometimes I wonder, if I pulled my energy back to neutral, if I stopped overcompensating, if I loved at the same level I was receiving, would it still feel strong? Or would everything start crumbling? Because if my effort is what's holding us up, that's not love, that's imbalance disguised as loyalty, and I don't want to resent someone for something I never addressed, but I also don't want to keep shrinking just to avoid conflict. I want to feel wanted loudly enough that I don't question it silently. I want to feel secure enough that I don't rehearse conversations in my head. I want to feel chosen in a way that removes doubt instead of feeding it, because love shouldn't feel like something you constantly measure. It should feel like something you rest inside, and until I can sit in it, without wondering if I matter the same way, I think that question will always echo softly. Am I actually loved, or am I just deeply loving? I think what makes this question heavy is that I don't doubt your feelings. I doubt your effort because feelings are invisible. Effort isn't. You can tell me you love me, you can say it in the right tone, you can even mean it. But love that isn't maintained eventually feels like memory, and I don't want to live off potential. I don't want to survive off they care, they're just bad at showing it, because if I can show it, if I can adjust, if I can communicate clearly, why does it feel like I'm the one stretching more? That's where the exhaustion comes in, not from loving you, from overcompensating for the space you leave. There's a specific loneliness that comes when you're the emotionally aware one, when you're the one who brings things up calmly, when you're the one who says, let's talk about it, when you're the one who makes sure small issues don't become big ones. And sometimes I wonder, if I stopped being that person, would you step into that role? Or would we slowly drift because I stopped carrying the emotional weight? That's not partnership, that's imbalance. And imbalance slowly turns love into doubt. I don't need perfection. I need reciprocity. I need to feel like if I fall apart, you won't just watch. I need to feel like if I go quiet, you'll notice. I need to feel like if I stop being strong for a moment, you won't become distant. Because love isn't just about who stays when it's easy. It's about who leans in when things feel uncomfortable. And sometimes I don't feel leaned into, I feel leaned on. And there's a difference. I don't want to be your emotional safety net without you being mine. I don't want to be the consistent one while wondering if I'm consistently valued. And maybe you do love me, but if I constantly have to question it, then something about the way it's being expressed isn't landing. Because real love doesn't eliminate all fear, but it does eliminate constant uncertainty. It doesn't make you feel like you're negotiating your worth. It makes you feel secure enough to stop asking yourself if you matter. And until I can sit in this without quietly measuring effort, without wondering if I'm too much, without shrinking my needs to maintain peace, that question will stay in the back of my mind. Am I actually loved, or am I just deeply convenient? I think the real fear isn't that you don't love me, it's that you love me comfortably. There's a difference. Comfortable love is quiet. It assumes. It relaxes a little too much. It stops trying as hard because it believes I'm not going anywhere. And maybe I won't, but that doesn't mean I don't notice the shift. In the beginning, effort feels automatic. You call just to hear my voice. You ask questions and actually wait for the answers. You care about how my day went, not just what happened. But once things feel stable, do you still pursue me? Do you still choose me loudly? Do you still protect the connection like it could be lost, or do you just exist in it? Because love that stops being intentional slowly starts feeling optional. And I don't want to feel optional in someone's life. I don't want to be the person you assume will always understand, the person you assume won't leave, the person you assume doesn't need reassurance, because the strong ones still need softness, the independent ones still need consistency, the calm ones still need effort, and sometimes I think people forget that. They mistake my patience for infinite tolerance. They mistake my understanding for emotional immunity. They mistake my loyalty for permanence. But even loyal people get tired. Even understanding people feel hurt. Even calm people question things when the effort changes. I don't want to be loved lazily. I don't want to be loved based on convenience. I want to be loved actively. I want someone who doesn't just assume I know they care, but make sure I feel it. Someone who doesn't just stay, but stays with intention. Because here's the truth, if I ever stopped trying the way I do now, would you fight for this the same way? If I ever pulled my energy back to neutral, would you step up or would you get distant? That question alone tells me a lot. Love shouldn't feel like something I'm maintaining by myself. It shouldn't feel like if I relax for a second, everything will slowly fade. It should feel mutual, balanced, protected from both sides. And until I feel that consistently, not just in moments, not just after conflict, not just when I express doubt, that quiet thought will linger. Am I loved deeply or just comfortably? Maybe the hardest part about all of this is that I don't want to accuse you. I don't want to sound ungrateful. I don't want to seem insecure. I don't want to turn something small into something heavy. But silence builds pressure, and pressure turns into quiet resentment, because when I feel like I'm giving more than I'm receiving, I don't explode, I adjust. I overthink, I analyze, I start loving more carefully, and that's when something shifts inside me. I stop being soft in the same way. I stop opening up as freely. I stop expressing needs because I don't want to feel like a burden. And you probably wouldn't even notice at first, because I don't change loudly, I change subtly. And that's the scary part, because once I start protecting myself emotionally, I don't fully come back the same. I don't want to have to guard my heart with someone who says they love me. I don't want to measure my words. I don't want to calculate how much reassurance I can ask for without seeming too much. I want to exist freely, but freedom only comes when love feels secure, not intense, not obsessive, secure. The kind of secure where I don't have to question your effort after a disagreement. The kind of secure where your consistency doesn't depend on my mood. The kind of secure where I don't feel like I have to earn softness from you. Because love shouldn't feel conditional. It shouldn't spike when I'm easy to love and dip when I need extra understanding. And sometimes I ask myself something deeper. If I disappeared tomorrow, would you miss me because you love me? Or because you lost something that benefited you? Would you miss my heart? Or just my stability? Would you miss the way I cared, or just the fact that I cared consistently? That difference matters more than people realize, because I don't want to be someone's comfort zone if I'm not also their conscious choice. I don't want to be someone's safe option if I'm not also their priority. And I don't want to keep pouring into something where I feel like I'm the emotional backbone. Love should feel like two people holding it up, not one person carrying it quietly. And until I feel that weight shared, I'll keep asking myself softly, am I actually loved, or am I just deeply dependable? I think what I've realized is this: if I constantly have to ask myself whether I'm loved, then something inside me doesn't feel safe, because real love doesn't require constant decoding. It doesn't make you sit alone at night replaying conversations. It doesn't make you question your worth after small disagreements. It doesn't make you shrink just to maintain peace. Real love feels steady, not perfect, not dramatic, steady. It feels like someone who chooses you, even when you're not at your best. It feels like someone who reassures without being forced. It feels like someone who protects your heart, like it's their responsibility too. And maybe you do love me, but if your love makes me anxious, if it makes me overanalyze, if it makes me feel like I'm asking for too much when I ask for consistency, then it's not landing the way love should, because love shouldn't make you question your value. It should reinforce it. It shouldn't make you feel like you're lucky to be chosen. It should make you feel mutually chosen. Maybe the real shift isn't asking, am I actually loved? Maybe it's asking, do I feel secure here? Do I feel prioritized? Do I feel emotionally safe? Because love isn't just something someone says. It's something you experience repeatedly. It's in the tone, the effort, the consistency after comfort sets in, the way someone handles you when you're difficult, not just when you're easy. And if I'm honest, I don't want intense love. I don't want dramatic love. I don't want love that feels like a roller coaster. I want love that makes me stop asking this question entirely. Love that's so clear, so intentional, so consistent that doubt doesn't have room to grow. Because if I'm constantly wondering whether I'm loved, then maybe I'm not asking for too much. Maybe I just haven't experienced love that makes the answer obvious. And when I do, I won't have to ask, I'll know. Some nights, I stay up hugging my pillow pretending it's someone. Not because I'm dramatic, but because it gets lonely when no one chooses you. You start wondering if love just missed you, if maybe everyone else got picked and you were the one who got skipped over. I tell myself I'm fine being alone, and most days I am, but late at night when the world is quiet, that's when the question comes back. Will love ever find me, or am I just meant to imagine it? I think the hardest part is not the loneliness. It's feeling like you have so much love to give and nowhere to put it, no hands to hold, no one to come home to, just you, your thoughts, and the same hope you keep tucking away every morning. And what scares me most is not being alone right now. It's the thought that maybe this is permanent. Being alone doesn't hurt the most. Being unchosen does. It's watching people find each other while you keep ending up by yourself. It's being told, your time will come so many times that it starts to feel like a placeholder sentence. You start questioning yourself. Am I too quiet? Too much? Not enough? You replay everything, trying to find the reason no one stayed. And late at night, when you're hugging a pillow, imagining it's someone who wants you back, those thoughts get louder. Not because you don't love yourself, but because you're tired of being the only one who does. The scary part is how slowly it affects your worth. You don't stop believing in love, you stop believing it wants you, and that's when loneliness becomes heavier than silence, because now it's not just about being alone, it's about wondering if something is wrong with you for being alone this long. This feeling doesn't mean you're unlovable, even though it really feels like it. It means you've been alone long enough for the silence to start telling stories. And silence is loud when it goes on too long. You start mistaking timing for rejection. You start turning waiting into a flaw. You start thinking love hasn't found you because you're missing something. But love doesn't work on fairness, and it doesn't run on schedules. Some people find it early. Some people find it after they've learned how to sit with themselves at night. And that doesn't make you behind. It makes you human. The fact that you still want love, still imagine it, still hope for it, even after feeling unchosen, that's not weakness. That's proof your heart didn't close. Imagining love at night doesn't make you desperate. It means you're human. You're not hugging a pillow because you're weak. You're doing it because your body remembers what closeness feels like, even when your life hasn't caught up yet. There's nothing wrong with wanting someone to come home to, with wishing there was a hand to reach for when the day finally goes quiet. The problem isn't that you imagine love, it's that you've been alone long enough to start believing wanting it is something you need to outgrow. But love isn't something you mature out of, something you wait for without turning against yourself in the meantime. You don't need to shame the part of you that still hopes at night. That part is just proof you haven't gone numb, and as long as you haven't gone numb, love hasn't missed you. Loneliness at night doesn't get to decide your future. Even when it feels endless, nights are heavy because they strip everything down. No distractions, no noise, just you and the question you try not to ask during the day. But night feelings aren't prophecies. They're just unmet needs speaking when everything else is quiet. Being alone right now doesn't mean you'll always be alone. And being unchosen so far doesn't mean you're unchoosable. It just means you haven't been met yet. There's a difference. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're not running out of time. You're just in the part of the story where love hasn't arrived, not the part where it never does. The hardest balance is holding hope without turning it into self-doubt, because when you hope for something for a long time, it can start to feel personal when it hasn't arrived yet. You tell yourself you're patient, but underneath that, there's a quiet fear that maybe hope is just another way of setting yourself up. So you try to numb it. You tell yourself you don't need love. You act like you're fine on your own, but hope doesn't disappear that way. It just goes quiet and waits for the night. The truth is, hope isn't the problem. Hope only hurts when you turn it inward and use it as proof that something is wrong with you. You're allowed to hope without questioning your worth. You're allowed to want love without it meaning you're lacking. Hope isn't weakness. It's just your heart still believing in a future you haven't reached yet. When love hasn't found you yet, it can make you feel invisible. You're moving through life unnoticed, unchosen, easy to pass by. But invisibility isn't the truth. It's just what loneliness whispers when it's tired of waiting. You don't get overlooked because you lack something. You get overlooked because connection isn't something you can force into timing. The right person doesn't miss you because they're better at noticing. They find you because they're looking for what you already are. And until then, you're not invisible. You're just living in the space before recognition. That space feels quiet. It feels long. It feels unfair. But it isn't empty. It's shaping you into someone who will recognize real love when it finally arrives. Not because you're desperate for it, but because you're ready to receive it without disappearing into it. Love usually doesn't find you when you're proving you deserve it. It finds you when you stop performing and start existing. For a long time, I thought if I was good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, someone would finally see me. So I overgave, overthought, over-explained. But love doesn't arrive as a reward for endurance. It arrives when you're no longer shrinking to be easier to choose. The moment you stop asking, what do I need to fix? And start asking, what do I need to feel safe? Something shifts. You don't chase connection anymore, you allow it, and that doesn't make love come faster, and it makes it come healthier. Because the love that finds you then isn't choosing you because you tried hard enough. It's choosing you because you're finally standing still as yourself. Waiting is hard because it's empty time. Not empty in life, but empty in connection. You're still living, still growing, still doing everything you're supposed to do, but there's no one to share the quiet with, and that's where loneliness sneaks in. The difference between waiting and loneliness is what you tell yourself while you're there. Loneliness says, nothing is happening because I'm not enough. Waiting says, something hasn't arrived yet, and that's not a reflection of my worth. Learning to sit in the waiting doesn't mean pretending you don't want love. It means refusing to let the absence of it turn into self-blame. You can want love deeply and still treat yourself gently in the meantime. You can feel the quiet without letting it convince you that this is all there will ever be, because waiting isn't where your story ends. It's just the space between who you've been and who you're about to meet. There's a moment when hope stops hurting, not because love arrived, but because you stop fighting yourself while waiting. You stop asking the question every night with fear in it. You still want love, you still imagine it, but it no longer feels like your life is on hold without it. Hope becomes something gentle, something you carry, not something that weighs you down. You realize love finding you was never about being chosen faster or proving you're worthy enough. It was about becoming someone who doesn't disappear while waiting to be seen. And when that shift happens, loneliness loosens its grip, not because you're no longer alone, but because you're no longer against yourself. That's when hope becomes safe again, and that's usually right before love finally knows where to find you. Some nights you still wish someone was there, and that doesn't mean the healing didn't work. It just means you're human. Missing connection isn't a setback. It's not proof you're regressing or going backward. It's just your heart remembering what it wants to share. The difference now is that the wanting doesn't hurt the same. It doesn't spiral. It doesn't turn into panic. It doesn't make you question your worth. It just exists. You can want love without feeling empty without it. You can imagine closeness without feeling broken when it's not there yet. And that's growth. Because you're no longer waiting with desperation. You're waiting with trust. Trust that love doesn't miss people who are becoming more themselves. It finds them when they're steady enough to receive it without disappearing. The love that finds you after this season feels different, not louder, not dramatic, safer. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't make you wonder where you stand. It doesn't ask you to stay up at night holding space for uncertainty. It meets you where you are, and because you spent time alone, because you've learned how to sit with yourself. You don't cling to it, you appreciate it, you don't lose yourself in it because you know what it feels like to hold yourself first. That's why this waiting was never a punishment, it was preparation, not to make you stronger in a hard way, but steadier in a soft one. So if you're still alone right now, still asking if love will ever find you, it will. And when it does, you'll understand why it couldn't find you earlier. You weren't meant to be met when you were questioning your worth. You were meant to be met when you finally believed you were already enough. If you're asking that question right now, it doesn't mean you're behind, it means you're honest. You're honest about wanting connection, about feeling alone sometimes, about hoping there's more than just nights where you hug a pillow and imagine what could be. And that honesty matters. Love doesn't find people who gave up on it. It finds people who stayed open even when it hurt, people who learned how to be alone without becoming bitter, who waited without turning against themselves. So no, love didn't miss you. It just hasn't arrived yet. And when it does, it won't feel like something you chased or finally earned. It'll feel like something that recognizes you, like it knew where you were the whole time, and suddenly those nights won't feel so heavy anymore. Not because you forgot them, but because they led you right where you were meant to be. One day you won't ask the question anymore, not because love arrived overnight, but because you stopped measuring your life by what's missing. You'll still want connection, you'll still imagine it sometimes, but it won't feel heavy. You'll realize you didn't waste these nights. You were learning how to stay gentle in a quiet season. And that matters, because the love that eventually finds you won't have to convince you that you're worth choosing. You'll already know. And when someone finally holds you, it won't feel like something you waited forever for. It'll feel like something that arrived right when you were ready to be seen, not as someone hoping to be chosen, but as someone whole. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind, because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing. And for a minute, it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight. No goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense. Just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, yeah, next time don't say so much. Next time don't get attached. Next time stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking, not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere, a slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything. Because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does, so you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore, you hold back details, you soften your honesty, you keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them, and you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud, you just feel them, and slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness. You just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore, why being around people still feels lonely. It's because you didn't heal. You adapted. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you fully. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you. It just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same. But it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic. And the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet. To someone who avoids their own emotions, your honesty feels like pressure, your awareness feels like exposure, your care feels like responsibility. So they leave. Not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity, that's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming, I should have known better, I should have protected myself. But that's not growth, that's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting, you didn't mess up by being open, you didn't lose because you cared, you just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudge their capacity? Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. that's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it. You move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow-through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate, that's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed. And for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection. Not constant intensity, just consistency, and that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept. And you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind. Because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up. The thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m. The fears you laugh off so nobody worries. The way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing. And for a minute, it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight, no goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense, just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, next time don't say so much. Next time don't get attached. Next time stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking, not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous, it means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people, you stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere. A slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything, because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does. So you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore. You hold back details. You soften your honesty. You keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them. And you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud. You just feel them. And slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness, you just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore. Why being around people still feels lonely? It's because you didn't heal, you adapt. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you, it just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same, but it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic, and the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet, to someone who avoids their own emotions. Your honesty feels like pressure. Your awareness feels like exposure. Your care feels like responsibility. So they leave, not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity. That's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. I should have protected myself. But that's not growth. That's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting. You didn't mess up by being open. You didn't lose chose because you cared. You just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway, and instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters: you didn't misjudge their potential, you misjudged their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it, so you move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness, you let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow through, it's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate. That's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed, and for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection, not constant intensity, just consistency. And that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept, and you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. Sometimes the question isn't, will I find love? It's deeper than that. It's, will someone ever choose me the way I choose them? Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, not when they're bored, but fully. There's a difference between being liked and being chosen. Liked is easy, chosen is intentional. And if you've been the one who always gives more, who stays longer, who loves harder, you start wondering if maybe you're meant to be the giver but never the one kept. You watch other people get picked without hesitation, publicly, proudly, confidently, and you sit there thinking, what is it about me that makes people unsure? Is it timing? Is it me? Am I too much? Not enough? And the scariest part isn't being alone. It's the thought that maybe you'll always be almost chosen. Being the almost changes you. You're not rejected loudly. You're not cut off dramatically. You're just not picked. You're the one they talk to every day until they meet someone else. The one they say they really like but never commit to. The one who's good enough to keep around, just not good enough to claim. And that messes with your head because there's no clear reason. They don't say you're lacking. They don't say you're the problem, they just hesitate. And hesitation feels personal. You start replaying everything. Was I too available, too understanding, too patient, or maybe not exciting enough, not mysterious enough, not whatever it takes to be chosen instantly? And slowly, your self-worth gets tied to someone else's indecision. That's the dangerous part. Because being the almost doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like you were close enough to hope, close enough to imagine it, close enough to get attached, but not close enough to stay. And when that keeps happening, you don't just question love, you question yourself. After being almost chosen enough times, you start adjusting yourself. Not dramatically, not obviously, just subtly. You become a little less expressive, a little less attached, a little less honest about how much you care. Because maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're too available, too deep, too ready. So you try being cooler, more detached, more mysterious. You pretend you don't need reassurance. You act like you're fine with seeing where it goes. You downplay your feelings so you don't scare anyone off. But here's the truth. Shrinking yourself doesn't make you more lovable. It just makes you less visible. And the worst part? Even when you adjust, even when you play it safe, you still end up almost chosen. Because the issue was never that you were too much. It's that you were giving depth to people who weren't ready for it. And instead of realizing that, you internalized their hesitation. You made it about your value. You thought, if I just change this one thing, maybe next time they'll stay. But love isn't unlocked by becoming smaller. It's aligned by being fully yourself and meeting someone who doesn't hesitate. And the sooner you stop reshaping yourself for someone's indecision, the sooner you realize you were never lacking. You were just misaligned. After a while, you stop expecting to be chosen, not because you don't want it, but because you're tired of getting your hopes up. So now, whenever something starts to feel good, you brace yourself. You tell yourself not to get excited, not to imagine too far ahead, not to believe it too much, because history has taught you how this usually ends. You assume they'll lose interest, assume they'll find someone better, assume you'll become the almost again. And that mindset is heavy, because you're not just protecting yourself, you're preparing for rejection before it even happens. You start reading into small changes, shorter text, longer replies, different energy. And instead of feeling secure, you feel on edge, not because they've done something wrong, but because you've been here before. You've felt the slow fade. You've watched interest turn into distance. You've experienced the shift from excitement to uncertainty. So now you expect it, and expecting rejection changes how you show up. You hold back, you don't fully invest, you act like you care less than you do, because if it falls apart again, at least you can say you weren't all in. But deep down, you don't want to live like that. You don't want to approach love like it's already ending. You just want one time where it doesn't. There's a difference between being unwanted and being unmatched. And if you've been the almost too many times, you start confusing the two. Unwanted feels personal, like there's something wrong with you, like you're missing some quality everyone else seems to have. Unmatched is different. Unmatched means the timing was off, the emotional depth wasn't equal, the intentions weren't aligned. Unmatched isn't about your worth, it's about compatibility. But when someone hesitates to choose you, it doesn't feel like misalignment, it feels like rejection. And rejection feels final. You forget that love isn't a competition, that being chosen isn't about being better, it's about being right for each other at the same time. You can be attractive, kind, emotionally available, and still not be someone's person. That doesn't reduce you. It just means alignment wasn't there. And the moment you stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, were we actually aligned? Everything shifts, because maybe you weren't almost chosen. Maybe you were just never meant to settle for someone unsure. Here's something you don't realize at first. Your fear of not being chosen might actually be protecting you, because when you're scared of being the almost again, you start paying attention. You notice inconsistency faster. You recognize mixed signals sooner. You don't ignore hesitation like you used to. Before, you'd cling to potential, you'd fill in gaps with hope, you'd convince yourself that uncertainty just needed time. Now, you watch. You see when someone's energy shifts, you see when effort isn't equal, you see when you're the only one leaning in. And instead of begging to be chosen, you pull back. Not out of ego, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, because deep down you don't want to be chosen by someone who's unsure. You don't want to be picked after being compared, after being doubted, after being an option. You want someone certain. So maybe the real shift isn't asking, will I ever be chosen? It's asking, do I even want to be chosen by someone who hesitates? And that question changes everything. At some point, you get tired of chasing certainty from other people. You get tired of waiting for someone to confirm your value, tired of reading into words, tired of hoping their actions will finally match. So something shifts. Instead of asking, do they want me? You start asking, do I even want this? That's power. Because when you become certain in yourself, you stop needing constant reassurance. You know what you bring, you know how you love, you know the depth you offer, and that confidence changes your energy. You don't beg, you don't overprove, you don't shrink to stay, you let people show up or not. And if they hesitate, you don't internalize it, you understand that someone else's confusion is not a reflection of your worth. You stop trying to convince people to choose you, because the right person won't need convincing. They'll recognize you, and more importantly, you'll recognize them, not because they picked you, but because they're clear, consistent, and certain. And this time, certainty goes both ways. Here's the part nobody tells you. Being chosen starts with choosing yourself first, not in a cliche way, not in a I don't need anyone way, but in a real way. It's choosing not to stay where you feel unsure, choosing not to compete for attention, choosing not to lower your standards just to secure a spot in someone's life. Because when you don't choose yourself, you'll accept being almost chosen. You'll accept being an option, maybe a placeholder. But when you decide you're not negotiable, everything shifts. You stop trying to earn love. You stop proving your worth. You stop overextending just to feel wanted. You realize something important. If someone has to debate whether you're enough, they're not your person. Choosing yourself means walking away even when you like them, even when there's potential, even when part of you hopes they'll change, because you don't want reluctant love. You want certainty. And the moment you become certain that you deserve that, you stop fearing the question, will I ever be chosen, because you already are, by yourself. Love feels different when you don't need it to validate you. Before, being chosen felt like proof that you were enough, proof that you were desirable, proof that you mattered. So when someone hesitated, it shook you, because it felt like they were confirming your worst fear. Now, love isn't proof anymore, it's a bonus. You don't look at someone's commitment as a measurement of your worth. You don't panic when someone pulls away. You don't chase reassurance like you used to, because your value isn't waiting on someone else's decision, and that changes everything. You approach love calmly, you enjoy it without clinging to it, you let it build instead of forcing it. You don't need someone to choose you to feel complete. You want to be chosen, yes, but you don't need it to feel worthy. And that shift is powerful, because when love is no longer validation, you stop settling for almost. You stop trying to convince someone. You stop auditioning for a role in their life. You let them decide. And if they hesitate, you don't break, you move on. So, will I ever be chosen? Yeah, but not in the way I used to think. I used to believe being chosen meant someone finally seeing my value, finally realizing what I bring, finally deciding I was enough. But I see it differently now. The right person won't discover my worth. They'll recognize it immediately. There won't be hesitation, no comparing, no, I'm not sure what I want. It'll be clear, because when someone is aligned with you, choosing you isn't a debate, it's natural. And here's the real answer to the question, I will be chosen when I stop entertaining people who are unsure. I will be chosen when I don't accept almost, when I don't beg for clarity, when I walk away from hesitation. because being chosen isn't about being better than someone else. It's about being right for someone who's right for you. And until that happens, I'm not behind, I'm not lacking, I'm not unlovable, I'm just not settling. So yeah, I'll be chosen. Not by someone confused, not by someone temporary, not by someone half in, but by someone certain. And this time I'll be just as certain back.